Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Stratosphere Lounge. Significantly more busy than it was in the past. I obviously have a lot more work to do in terms of getting these things positioned the way I want them. I thought I could kind of just stand them there, but nope. They're all going to take a certain amount of placement, but you'll get the general idea. And hello to there she is back there. Yeah. So. It's good to be here. Sorry about our delay from Thursday nights. We're on Friday night tonight, and I hope everybody's doing really well. Don't have a whole lot to talk about really. It's our Stratosphere Lounge show tonight, so it's our political show. I suspect we'll probably jump into the questions right quick because I got nothing really else working on. I'm working on everything here, trying to get things going. You can see our midnight cowboy in the back there. I'm gonna have to break. He's so tall. I made him life size. He's 6'3". I mean, the guy's a gigantic man. Oh, you can see. Hey, John. How's it going, John? Big guy. The way I received this one from the printer, they did the cutouts on the arms, but they left that white in there for the between the legs for the brace. But I think we're gonna have to cut that out for the sake of consistency. He's a little desaturated too, so I don't know. We'll see. In any event, we're here. Let me do one thing while I'm here. I'm sorry about the delay here. Just me knock the AC down a touch. I wade my way through this menagerie here. Just talk amongst yourselves. Everything's fine. No need to panic. Everything's just great. Everything's completely groovy. And
we're fine. Everything's fine. How are you?
I'm great. I'm doing just great. Let's move Johnny up a little bit. He deserves a prominent. The problem is he goes out of frame if I get him much closer. Okay. So anyway, here we are. Who's the space chick? I have. This is actually the version 1 of the space chick. I've got a much better version on the wall over there, and I'm not going to take her down because I just like seeing that every time I come in the door. And I'm going to have to be careful with the lights too. Sorry, hang on. Because. Oh, sorry, John. I beg your pardon. There we go. Excuse me, Jim. Yeah, well, you're getting the idea. So, it'll be filled out and appropriately lit and generally groovy, but it's the basic idea. I don't know what I'm going to do with getting that John thing closer. I may have to get up on a higher stool or something and crank the camera up, but you get the idea. So I think we're pretty much ready to go with the interview show. I just got to give Johnny a call and see when he's available. Get that baby rolling. I didn't want to book anything until I had everything in place because sometimes things just don't show up on time, and that's how that works. I had the left. Hang on. Yeah, it's all one giant wall of confusion here. I had the John Voight thing was done locally, and I think he's a little desaturated. He'll be fine. I'll put a little black magic marker around the edges, take some of that white off the edge there, and I'll just reposition everybody. I don't know what I'll do. I'll probably put Kirk behind the corner, raise him up higher. And this is a high-class problem because it looks like we're more or less ready to go with this big thing. So that's all good news. I actually do think I am going to be. That is John Voight. That's John Voight from Midnight Cowboy. And I believe he'll be the first person that we're going to be interviewing. And I haven't quite exactly decided on what that archetype is going to be exactly. It's either going to be the innocent, the innocent man, because he's not really. I mean, the problem with the innocent man is we're talking about a guy who's like presumed innocent or presumed guilty, like the fugitive. I'm talking about a guy who's got a fundamental innocence in him. So maybe I might go with the Palooka, or I might just call that episode The Heart of Gold. But in any event, John's played two characters that I'm interested in talking with him about. One is Joe Buck from Midnight Cowboy, and the other one is Billy from The Champ. Both tough guys, engaged with a lot of unsavory activities, but both of whom have heart of gold. There's something about them that that manages to redeem them and make them lovable. And I'm kind of interested in that. So I will not be doing any more interviews with the Gorn Captain until at least 2024. But our interview with him when we were missing Scott, I guess, was I thought was kind of interesting and amusing. And I got to raise Bill up a little bit. I know I don't want to take the whole show doing this, but since it's relatively easy, let me just do it now because it's going to bug me for the rest of the show. Hang on. Whoops. That was not a good idea. And that wasn't either. You'll get the general drift of the thing sooner or later. There we go. Good enough for government work. And then I realized now that on some level I'm going to have to still, absolutely still, but we'll figure it out. I got to do something about I don't have a full length of James T. Kirk of the Starship Enterprise. Because technically he's leaning against a rock, but I think we get the idea. That's kind of why I guess I had him down lower. We'll sort it all out. I'm just babbling. I don't know what the hell I'm doing today. So since I don't know what I'm doing, why don't we just jump right into the questions and see what we get from there. Every day gets a little tougher for me to see what's going on without these spectacles. So it's life, I guess. Oh, I should get yeah, it's funny. The Scorch 191 says you could have the Gorn to the right of Bill with a big pow on his face. Having a Batman back there would be pretty cool. What a shame I didn't get a chance to talk to Adam West. I would have liked that very much. Still, it's kind of the hall. That's kind of where I'm going with it. Kind of the Museum of Pop Culture thing. So I might just end up doing that. Who knows? I mean, I didn't get to interview Shatner either, or some of the other characters in the background. So I could kind of do that. That'd be actually really kind of cool to have a Batman back there.
When I was in middle school, I caught reruns of the old Adam West Batman.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Squirrels in the air conditioning here. The other thing that would be cool to have would be what the heck was it? Oh, maybe a Johnny Quest or something. We'll see. Yours truly's been working his little neurons non-stop here for the last several weeks, and I'm kind of feeling it. So I am definitely a little detached today. Yesterday was just a last-minute emergency; just couldn't make it. Anyway, here we are. So let's do some questions. Why don't we? Triples in the air ducts. That's a good idea. All right, this is not the first question. I just the first one I saw because the picture's so cool. So I'll come back up. But it's a picture of the Starship on the launch pad on the new elevated pad, and it looks like all of SpaceX out in front of them, which is not a whole lot of people really considering what they've done. And this question's from our friend Henry Lumley, so we'll start with that. Why don't we? Hey, Bill, the next Starship launch is going to be soon, probably October. I guarantee you that thing was ready to fly by middle of August. But the government, of course, wasn't, so we can't we can't do anything that looks like might be catching up to where we'd be without a government. So I'm sure they've got a plan. But I have to tell you, the two pictures, in fact, I'm going to just grab these if I can, because they are genuinely spectacular. Man, that looks like the 21st century or the early 20th. I haven't figured out yet. Anyway, hey, Bill, the next Starship test launch is going to be soon, probably in October. The rocket is ready. It's just waiting on flight approval from the FAA. Well, good luck with that. The FAA's report on the mishap during the last flight and recommendations for additional safety procedures came out about 2 weeks ago. And it was about 15 minutes later when SpaceX announced that they had completed all of the 90 or so required upgrades. So will you and the guys be planning to stream this launch? Yes, we certainly will. Oh my God in heaven, if that's not a government versus private sector statement. They take 4 months or whatever it's been, April, May, June, July. Yeah, 4 or 5 months to come up with the report on the thing, and then SpaceX fixes it 15 minutes later. I'm sure they had them all fixed already. Oh man, that's enough to make a grown man cry. You may notice that the top of the booster is now sporting that new hot staging ring, which I will see if I can get a look at that, which should make everything a little more exciting. SpaceX posted this picture of the Starbase staff with the caption, "Made on Earth by Humans." Yep. And it is made on Earth by humans. And if you wanted to be just a little bit more specific, you could say it was made in America by Americans, but, I'm a little chauvinistic that way because it wasn't made on Earth by all the humans on Earth. And while I'm very proud it was made in America, I think a large percentage of the total forces designed to make sure that this thing never flies also comes from America. So I guess you can't have your cake and eat it too. Here are the two pictures that came with this. Oh, God, I keep forgetting I'm dealing with two streams here, so hang on a second. There's one going into YouTube. Hang on. Here's the second one. Yep, here's the second one. Though that'd be too much to ask for, wouldn't it? If it would just... No, that's not the same one. Hang on a second. Everybody be cool. Nobody freak out. Yep. And here's the second one. You could just move, you bloody picture. All right, so there we go. Now let me get that into Twitch. This is tedious. Here's number one. And here's number two. So, yeah, guys, that looks like the future to me, by golly. I have to say, without anything on the base except for that elevated launch tower, it just looks so clean. The gantry looks so clean. And that is the technical term is a big-ass rocket is what that is. But it does look absolutely fan-frickin-tastic. Fan-frickin-tastic. So, wow. Wow. I would love to interview Elon Musk. It's not out of the question, I suppose. And the reason I'd like to interview him is because essentially I have one question, really. I mean, I'd like to hear his variations on it, but I really genuinely have one question, and I don't think I've ever heard anybody ask him this question before. And my question for Elon Musk would be, Elon, you seem to know a bit about everything. I've been looking at the cycles of history and all the rest of this stuff, and it's my contention that you're not trying to go to Mars so much as you're trying to get away from Earth. And that's just the nearest stop. I think you're going to the red planet to get away from the red tape here on the blue planet. And I'd like to hear his answer to that. Because, again, 15 minutes to do the... 15 minutes. If he'd done it in 15 days, that would have been impressive. 15 hours wouldn't have surprised me. But 15 minutes? Sure, why not? I just never thought I'd live to see it, frankly. And I am just so grateful that I had a chance to just to see this thing actually constructed. It's going to fly, and but they say October, so we're recording this on 15th of September, so there's probably another 2 weeks out of everyone's lives that we'll never get back. That's 2 weeks a delay on the Mars landing because the FAA is the FAA. And way back early in 2004 or 5, not long after I started writing Eject, I got a chance to go up and talk to some guys at a company called X-Corps, a rocket company up in the Mojave. They're no longer in business, sadly enough. I wrote an essay up there I liked very much called Trinity. And at that point in 2004, the guy who was the president of X-Corps said that the National Aeronautics and Space Administration and the Federal Aviation Administration are there to make sure that nobody flies in space. That's their job. And at the time, I thought, wow, that's a little harsh. But looking back on it, I realized, no, he was exactly right, and he was exactly right early. That's what the FAA and and NASA are there for now, to make sure that nobody gets to fly in space. Well, screw them if they can't take a joke. That's the way I look at it. We're going anyway. Honestly, that's the way to look at it, is like, we're going anyway. You know what? You want to stop us? You can come up there and write us a ticket. I've been reading more and more of the great of the Fourth Turning, this book about cyclical nature of history and how history doesn't. I always assumed these cycles were hundreds of years or thousands of years, and that they were not particularly regular, that things would rise and collapse and there'd be some unknown period of time between the two, and then they would rise and collapse more or less according to the same pattern. But the idea of the Fourth Turning is that society functions on an 80 to 100 year cycle, closer to 84 years, somewhere around there, which they call the seculum, which is the Roman term for the human lifespan. And the idea is that just as there are 4 seasons in the year, there are 4 seasons to everyone's life, and where you are relative to the last crisis will determine how you feel about things. If you're, according to this theory, I'm a boomer, but I'm a late boomer, and a late bloomer too, for that matter. The baby boom is defined as generally between 1943, 44, 45, and 1960 to 64. If you take the 1960 definition, which I choose to, that means if I'd been born 9 months, 10 months later, I would have been Gen X. So I'm a 59 late boomer, but that does put me into the first generation after the crisis. That crisis being World War II and the Great Depression. So I am a direct child of what they call the GI generation, what's often known as the greatest generation. And sometimes these things are staggered. There's a silent generation between the GI generation and the boomers. These are the guys like Neil Armstrong, for example, and most of the astronauts are silent generation guys. Their war was Korea. They were just a little bit too late for World War II. And they accomplished some amazing things. So my childhood was during what these authors are calling a high. Right after the war, or after any crisis, once the crisis has survived, the culture, the society coalesces. They've just won a victory, or at the very least, there's still afloat to talk about it. That sense of giddy euphoria is not only there, but that sense of crisis is past, so everybody's kind of relaxed, and confidence is booming. Just been through this crisis that has burned away all of this scrub and brush, and all of the incompetent people are gone because the war meant that they had to be gone. There are no political generals. There are plenty of political generals at the beginning of the war, and none at the end of the war. And so that GI generation comes home, having conquered the world and made the world safe for democracy, rebuilt the world, and now they're wearing skinny ties and they're drinking highballs and smoking cigarettes, and that was my dad. So the theory behind the Fourth Turning is I have a direct connection to the crisis years because both my parents lived through it. I didn't. The next generation, which I think they call the 13th generation for some reason, we call it Gen X. They have no direct they were not raised by people from the crisis. They're their grandfathers, and that's not the same thing. In fact, it's often a very different thing. These guys posit that one generation and then the next, the second generation, the fathers and the the grandfathers and the grandsons have kind of a weird sort of connection to each other. In any event, there's the high. There's the let me think. What do they call it? There's a phase. I cannot remember what they call it, but there's a phase. Basically, means the kind of the maturation, the summer, because the high would be the spring. The summer is kind of the awakening, and then the third phase of this 4-year cycle is the unraveling, which we have been watching for the 20 years or so that I've been doing this political commentary. I started watching the unraveling, and then after the unraveling comes the crisis, and after the crisis comes the next high. So we are due and overdue. So as I've said many times, I think that they've done an updated version of this book called The Fourth Turning is Upon Us, and I haven't read it yet. I have to tell you, I'm at the point where I've got about a third of the way through the first book, and I really think I've gotten everything there is to get out of that book. It's just saying the same thing again and again. It's getting harder and harder to read. But the theory is remarkably sound, and they got a lot of great dates and so on. So the reason I bring all this up is because when you look at those pictures of what SpaceX is doing, first of all, they're showing me as I enter the winter of my life, which is not a fun thing to say either, but nevertheless, if it's 20, 40, 60, 80 years, I'm in the fourth quarter. I'm early in the fourth quarter, but, still fourth quarter up there. And so I get to see the things that I saw 2 generations ago when I was growing up. And I get to see them actually happening again after watching them disappear. So, wow, Roger Ramjet, we're a week apart there, my friend. Although you are older than I am, and so I will respect my elders, as usual. There's another April 1959. I'm in April 1959. So how about that? That was an excellent vintage, I might point out. Oh my gosh, according to Wikipedia, Bill was born on April 7th, 1959. That lion, no good for nothing, Wikipedia. It's true, though. And parenthetically, I mentioned this once or twice before. April 27th, how about that? I found this out about 4 or 5 years ago, after my wife arrived and after I was married. As you probably know, and I've often talked about setting up a sort of a grand coalition to get the English and American versions of the language to agree on a lot of things that we disagree on. Just kind of form like a what kind of committee is that? Not reconciliation. We basically trying to get everybody to agree. And so I'd go into this conference well armed with the certain things that I think we should take the American version on, like theater should be spelled TheaTer, that kind of thing. But there's some you have to give to the British and even to the Europeans, and one of them is there's no way to deny it that their way of numbering dates makes more sense than we do as written. In America, we would say I was born on April 7th, 1959, so that'd be April 7th, 471959. That would be my birthday. But it does make more sense to say instead of saying month, day, year, they say day, month, year. So technically, that would make me 7/4/1959. And what's interesting about that is 7/4 in the American system is the 4th of July. I have the only birth date on the calendar that is the inverse of the 4th of July on those two things. So I always wondered how cool it would be to be born on the 4th of July. And somewhere around 7 or 8 years ago, I realized you kind of were, in a way. Actually, that's kind of cool. So anyway, it's really quite impressive to see this, and no wonder. it must have been tough for the lefties to really start to hate Elon Musk after, he'd done all the electric cars and all the rest of this stuff, and then boom, it's like, okay. I do have to say that I am occasionally disappointed by listening to the SpaceX launch using metric system. I know it makes scientific sense and all the rest of it. It just doesn't sound right, and that's a function of being that 2 generations ago when such a formative time for me. Altitude is now passing through 75,000 feet, and we are 3.6 nautical miles downrange. Nautical mile is a useful measuring unit, unlike a kilometer, which means absolutely nothing. The meter doesn't have any particular meaning. The meter is not a magical number that corresponds to anything with nature. Nautical mile is, though. Nautical mile is 1 minute of latitude. 60 nautical miles is 1 degree of latitude. So you could make the case that, hey, man, you guys are the ones who are doing all this backwards stuff. And if counting on your fingers makes it easier for you, then have your metric system. That's fine with me, I guess. None of my business. I do know that when I travel kilometers per hour, which you only get a chance to do in Arizona, south of Tucson, there's part of Interstate 8 there that's still, for some reason or another, is still part of that. We're going metric in 1976 thing. And so that stretch of Interstate 8 there from the border to about just south of Tucson, is it Interstate 8? Maybe not. It might be. I don't know what it is. I don't remember. But in any event, it's an interstate, and that little stretch has got kilometers. So you look down and we're doing 160 kilometers an hour or something. It doesn't feel very fast to me. A mile is a nice manly distance, not like a puny little nubbin of a unit like a kilometer is. But I digress as usual. All right, here we go. From the top here, Eric Blake. Hey, Bill, do you think Biden will actually remain the Democratic nominee to the bitter end, or will the Democrats get him out in time to potentially save their chances of keeping the White House next year? If the latter, any idea of who the replacement might be? Well, I just put up a show. Sorry. Bone Canoe 86 says the meter was supposed to be 1/10 millionth of the distance from the pole to the equator, but somebody messed up, so it's off a little. That's that scientific, accurate metric system that we constantly being told is so superior to our system. What a useless piece of information. It is 1/10 millionth of the distance. A nautical mile is 1 minute of arc. 60 nautical miles is 1 degree of arc. If I'm in the ocean and I go 60 nautical miles north, and I was at 34 degrees, now I'm at 35 degrees. Isn't that amazing? Don't tell me to stay on target, Eric. I'm going to go wherever I want to go. I have a heat seeker that roams around, and I just find whatever targets I like, and that's where the show goes. Anyway, I had thought they would try it, that they would try to keep the lid on Biden. But after we just put up a right angle today, Steve's show, that I called Sinking Fast Now, because I've known what Alzheimer's looks like up close with my mom, and it happened slowly at first, then very quickly. And Biden is going so fast now that there's no way to ignore it. His recent trip to Vietnam and Alaska, and then the catastrophe when he was in Hawaii several weeks ago, I don't think anybody can hide it anymore. There are people who've been determined. Well, most of us knew he was in real trouble before the 2020 election. And then a lot of people since then have come to realize he doesn't know where he is. And I think now even the people who are determined not to see it cannot avoid seeing it now. I think it's just inescapable. So the discussion that's going on with the Democrats now is not how do we get rid of the top of the ticket. It's like, how do we get rid of both parts of the ticket? The meter is connected to nature by definition. It is the distance light travels in a vacuum in 1 divided by 299,792,458 seconds. You're right. It's absolutely perfect. It's supposed to have been 10,000 kilometers from the pole to the equator, but it's not. So we'll see. Anyway, if you really, I would like to talk to a real specialist in math, and I'd like to talk to them about whether we would be completely or significantly further advanced as a species if we were using base 12 to count on. Because I think just think 12 is just such an infinitely more useful number than 10. And this is presumably a fluke. And I would really, really be curious to know if you took a generation and raised them to count on base 12 with their new mathematics. I mean, any mathematician, most people who had a high school education, when I did, can add or count in base 12. It's just we don't think in base 12. But I think I'd be very interested in knowing how much different science would be if people were using base 12 arithmetic. Anyway, or base 16 for that matter. So here's the thing: they don't just have to get rid of either the top or the bottom of the ticket; they have to get rid of both of them. And that's going to be a tough sell, because if they ditch both ends of the ticket, that's kind of a blatant admission that this was the worst administration in the history of the country. I know for a certain fact that there have been a number of times when presidents have changed their vice presidents on a second or third term. Lincoln did that, among others. But they really have a problem with this. I really, honestly, think that Kamala Harris is. I'll just come out and say, I actually, honest to God, and I'm not saying this for effect. I think she's a little retarded. I really do. I think she's got an IQ in the mid to low 90s, because her cognitive ability it's not like it's skipping beats like Joe's brain and heart. You can tell she's working at full capacity. It's just that full capacity is shocking. It's just shocking. And I realized, that's kind of, I guess, the reason she got away with it for so long. Well, we also know what a good reason for that reason is, but I think it's part of the progressive and kind of the Democratic Party brand to speak to everybody like their children, and to lecture things like their children, which is why they bring children in to talk about climate change, for example. Let the children lead us. This not a surprise that that it's the left that has books like Everything I Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. I'm not surprised you say that. I take issue with the overall idea, but having listened to many of your politics and watched your emotional reaction to things, I do believe that you believe that you've learned everything you need to know while you were in kindergarten. But I contend that everything that you learned in kindergarten was stuff that had to be pretty much shaken out of you pretty quick, because life is much more complicated than kindergarten, and that's why we don't let kindergartners vote, although I know you're working on that. So there's so much embarrassing about this it's just endless embarrassment. But I think the thing that absolutely drives me mad is when the President of the United States, and he says it, I think virtually every time he ever speaks, when the President of the United States says, "Oh, I better do this or else I'm going to get in trouble," or I better not get off the teleprompter or else somebody's going to yell at me. That sounds exactly like what you would hear from somebody in a senior care facility. It's exactly what they would say. Nurse Ratchet's going to be very upset if I go off the teleprompter. And now I'll give everybody watching 15 seconds to see if they can guess who Nurse Ratchet might be in the real world. Tick, 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 tick. That's enough time. It's Joe Biden. And it's, people said it's elder abuse. I have no sympathy for Joe Biden at all. Zero, none. I think he's the most incompetent, lying, evil guy. He's certainly the most corrupt president I've ever seen. And his reflex to lie has been with him his entire career. That's not a result of his mental mental weakness. He was slow Joe before he ever showed signs of cognitive decline from whatever low bar he had set earlier. He was always kind of a, just a guy who was always, I graduated this and I had this and this and this and this and if you don't like it, you can step outside where Corn Pop is waiting for you with the rusty razor blade, because that's what they used to do back in those days. So back to the heart of the question. How do they get rid of both of them at the same time? They can't have Joe step down now, because if Joe steps down now, then even they can't get away from the constitutional clarity of what happens next. If they were to convince Joe to step down now, it would be President Harris, which I'm 100% in favor of, by the way. 100% in favor of. The reason I say that is because I cannot imagine anybody being worse than Joe Biden. And furthermore, the reason I would like to see this happen, like Biden goes off the deep end, can't open his mouth kind of thing. The reason I'd like to see this happen is because I think it would be a very fitting end to the era of identity politics to have Kamala Harris be the first woman president and have her be so obviously, shockingly incompetent and unpleasant and phony that all of these people have been pushing this identity politics. We have to have the first black president, have to have the first woman president, have to have the first this president, that president. Fine. Okay, you got it. Congratulations. Here you go. Yeah, that's it. You got it. That's it. She's going down in the history books. Kamala Harris, first woman president of the United States. How proud you must be. And this is kind of like, it's kind of like you're trying to set up the James Buchanan Presidential Library. You don't have a lot to work with there. And so she's quite impaired.
I have an argument against that, though.
That this voice comes out of nowhere, and I'm just sitting there, it's like I'm sitting here minding my own business, and then there's it's like, yes, go ahead, Gabriel, blow your trumpet. Yes. Clay is with us.
Who was it? Sandra Day O'Connor, who was the first woman on the Supreme Court?
Yes, I think so.
When Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, though, she was just completely memory hold because she was still a Reagan appointee. And they still promoted Ruth Bader Ginsburg as being the first woman on the Supreme Court. So if they can't, they'll memory hold Kamala Harris.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, well, Ruth Bader Ginsburg wasn't the first woman on the Supreme Court. And what a... I can't look at Ruth. Well, before she departed this vale of tears, every time I looked at Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I just, for some reason or other, I just kept thinking of Ruth Buzzy. Couldn't get it out of my head, and that'll set the age bar between people that'll think that's funny and people who think, my God, he has no idea what the hell is he saying. But I don't know. I just expect her to get into the middle of a argument on some constitutional policy and then just get out the handbag and just start, whapping Clarence Thomas over the head with it, Just look up Ruth Buzzy for those of you who didn't get the reference. You'll see what I mean. Anyway, so what do they do about that? Look, I can tell you what they're wanting to do. I don't think there's any way. I think they're going to push Biden over the line to the nomination. This is what I think is going to happen. In fact, barring some really, really black swan event, this is what I'm sure will happen. There's no question that he's not going to be able to campaign in 2024. None in my mind. If they were to stick with him, you can rest assured that there would be no debates. And I don't know how long it's been since there were no debates. I don't know if there was a period when there were no debates during the time between Lincoln, let's say, and the first televised debate, which was Kennedy and Nixon. But in any event, he didn't campaign in 2020 either, exactly. But he did manage to crawl onto the stage against Trump, and I have to tell you, I was really wasn't just surprised at Biden. I was a little disappointed that Trump didn't just put him more on the memory game. But in any event, that was 3 years ago, coming up on, and so I don't see them running him. So I think what will happen, besides, it's not like you need Joe Biden's approval. It's not like Joe Biden is gonna say, no, damn it, I'm gonna stay in this race. He's gonna get his instructions, and then he'll get his ice cream cone, and then he'll say, well, I thought I was gonna run for a second term, but I decided not to because I don't want to get yelled at. Something along those lines will happen. I don't want to, I'm not supposed to run for a second term, and I don't want to get yelled at, and they hate it when I do that. So what I think will happen is he will be stage managed to not to resign. He'll be stage managed to declare that a country as young and vigorous as the future that the progressives hold for America, and all the changes that need to happen, all of the enormous complexes. We've only got 4 or 5 years now to save the planet before the temperature increases by 1 degree centigrade and carbon dioxide hits 450 parts per million. And as Joe said, there's no coming back from that, which would be news for, the creatures 80 million years ago when carbon dioxide levels were 3,000 parts per million. But that's just me following the science. So he'll be told, Joe, you're going to have to sit this next one out. They'll think of some way to spin this as not only patriotic on Joe's part, but a testament to his character, to his monumental character, that he is so selfless as opposed to that egomaniac Trump, that he is going to remove himself from office because he's no longer feels like he's on the top of his game, and Trump should have done this, and blah, 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 blah. And I am virtually positive that the person they will replace him with is Gavin Newsom. Now, let's just say that plays out, because I think that is likely. I don't see any way that he's gonna do it. 5708 Rivera says Gavin or Cuomo will step in. Cuomo's finished. He's done. Cuomo is done because he broke one of the commandments. He basically behaved like a male towards female members of the staff, or at the very least, he did worse than that. Actually, he cannot. Cuomo is dead to them. He's off the table. He's gone. He's not coming back. And that really is a pretty barren field left, and really the only person they've got, I think, left on the bench with any kind of staying power for the liberals is Newsom. So yeah, George says either Newsom or Michelle Obama. I know that Michelle Obama would appeal to a lot of people, but I still think a lot of people would say, not that it's ever slowed the Democrats down before, but what does she know about running government? I don't think it's going to be Michelle Obama, because I think that Michelle Obama is quite worried that Donald Trump would whoop her badly. Now, here's the thing about Newsom. The real Athrink says, no way Newsom is hated in flyover country. Well, they're all hated in flyover country, aren't they? And that's a good point, too, by the way. 5708 Rivera says, and it's too much work for Michelle. See, that's the thing, too. It's actual hard work campaigning. So I think it's got to be Newsom, because I can't think of anybody else it could possibly be. Here's the thing about Newsom. I was listening to him defending California against Sean Hannity, and I realized that this guy is very good at what he does, because he was saying things, and he was saying them with such confidence that I actually began to think, well, maybe California isn't in ruins, and maybe jobs aren't. Maybe this is the number one place for innovation in the country, because he's like boom, boom, boom. And I think he's the guy. Bob Knife says revive Hillary. I don't think that's an option. First of all, there would be just something glorious about Donald Trump beating Hillary Clinton twice. That would be marvelous. You could look at the 2016 election and say that Trump couldn't have beaten anybody except for Hillary Clinton, because Trump can be pretty abrasive. The only person who's just by orders of magnitude more unpleasant than Donald Trump can be is Hillary Clinton. I happen to like Trump, but Clinton is, she's just, and let's not forget her health in 2016 was under serious doubt, as you may remember, with her, with her little, brain freezes and, ooh, look, balloons. And so I don't think it's her. I think it's going to be Newsom, because Newsom is, he's everything that the progressives care about. He has all of the qualities that they deeply value. He's telegenic. That's all they give a damn about, Does he look good? Yep. Well, congratulations, trot him out. But there's a lot of problems with that, and obviously the biggest problem for Newsom is that he's governor of California. And not only would he have to run on the record of California, which would not be fun to do, California as a state is there's nobody admires this state anymore. We're at best a laughing stock, and at worst we're Babylon, and Detroit mixed together. And there's nobody in the country that respects or likes California or Californians anymore. So it's not even a question of whether they like him or not. It's just a question of, and besides, if it is Newsom, they carry California. What a surprise. There's still another year, but I don't think it's going to be anybody else. And then you have to decide, what do you do with Harris? And Harris is a unique problem too, because if Harris were a white male, needless to say, they'd show him the door. When I say him, I'm not a biologist, but you follow what I'm saying here. You've got a woman vice president, and you've got a woman of color vice president. Those are pretty high cards as far as the victimology tarot goes. So they can't very well just boot her out. I think I think they're kind of stuck with. Let me put it this way. I think it's easier for them to substitute Biden out than it is for Harris. I think Harris is a unique problem. She's not too old. She's got the victim cards, and to simply say that she's not capable of it is to admit that she was wrong in the first place, and to admit that she was a affirmative action hire in the first place. So that's an awful lot of crow that they'd have to eat. But, I was going to say that if they're smart, they'll do it. But I think there are some things that they just can't do. They've lost working people. So the only brand they have now are the radicals and the far leftists. And I don't think you throw a woman of color off the ticket because she's too stupid to have a chance to win. Greetings, Bill from San Diego. Hello, Alphabet, and everybody else, all of you. So now let's just look at the other side of the ticket here for a second. I saw some highlights of Donald Trump in North Dakota. And was it South Dakota? I think it was. I want to say it was North Dakota, but actually it was probably South Dakota, because I don't think there actually is a North Dakota. I think it's just a postal address. I don't think anybody lives there. But I saw Trump just a couple days ago, and he looks older. South Dakota. Yeah, there is no North Dakota. I knew it. I've flown over what is marked out on a map as North Dakota, but you do that at night. There's no lights down there. Nobody lives there, actually. And I saw Trump, and man, he is sharp as a tack. He's just good, He really has just the man's actually capable of putting thoughts together. A lot of them. He started the whole thing by saying, "You don't mind if I go off teleprompter, do you?" He never said no. And then he listed all the things he wanted to do and listed what his first, acts in office would be and some of the promises that he was going to make and stuff. And I think that he sounded really, really good. And I think that on some level, we've been having this conversation for months and months now, but it's died down somewhat because Ron DeSantis's campaign has just taken off like a wet blanket. And so I think that Trump is at his worst when he's sniping at people on our own side, and when it looked for a while there like DeSantis was a threat. There's a lot of circular firing squad stuff going on, but I don't think anybody has the slightest misconception now that they have any chance of beating Donald Trump. And I understand why DeSantis is running now. Everybody's saying he'd be perfect for 2028, and he would be perfect for 2028. The problem for DeSantis is he's only governor through 2026, if I recall correctly, and that leaves 2 years. Now, probably the smart play for DeSantis, I don't remember exactly how the Florida senatorial thing is shaping up. But I suppose there's a path for DeSantis where he finishes his term as governor in 26 and then becomes a senator, U.S. senator in 27, and then runs as a former governor. That's a possibility. But in any event, you can't really just drop off the radar 2 years before the election and then hope to come back. Politics doesn't work that way usually. The real Catherine says DeSantis is done politically. He's done for now, I think. I don't think he's got any play at all in 2024, which surprised me because I thought 4 or 5 months ago, I thought he was looking really good. But my point is, you look on the bright side, and the bright side is now that he doesn't appear to be a threat, Trump is relaxing about any challenges he might be having, and he's putting away that Ron DeSanctimonious thing, and that that little period of a couple months in there was not Donald Trump at his best. So he's going to have to, and plus we've already had the first Republican primary debate, which was less than stellar. Vivek, clearly seemed to be taking the lead there. He'd be a good choice. Listen, we don't have to like their game to play their game. We live in the world that we live in, and we have to play the cards that we're dealt. And the cards that we're dealt are, at this point in 2024, the United States has had so many years, decades really, of identity politics, so that if you pretend like it's not there, you're deluding yourself. Now, I'm not saying that means you go for a affirmative action hire, because we have a much, 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 much better bench than they do. But I really do think it needs to be a hyphenated American. I don't believe in the concept of hyphenated Americans. I find it repulsive, and I find it reprehensible. I think the whole idea is just disgraceful. But that's the world we live in, and I think that if you give them 2 white males, you're going to make it easier for them than you have to, because there are other people that are available that I think would do a perfectly fine job as president. I can't think of another white male other than DeSantis at the time, anyway, who would be a really powerful vice presidential choice. Kristi Noem's a definite choice. Vivek is be the first Indian American. This is so important to them. And look, this is kind of where I'm going with what I'm saying here. I find the whole thing to be repulsive, but the fact of the matter is, if you want to actually win the election, and if there's a significant percentage of the population that determines who they vote for based on whether or not they're advancing the social cause by making it somebody different. Oh, our first woman. Oh, our first American. Oh, our first Hispanic. All of this. If that gets you 15% of the vote, if it gets you 5% of the vote, that's probably enough. So, that's that's where I would go. And if you're going to go that road, I forgot the name. Is it Sears in Georgia, the black Republican woman? See, again, I'm just going to keep saying this because every time I say it, it makes catches in my craw. But there it is. I haven't seen an awful lot of her, but she impressed me what I did see. And Virginia, sorry. Yeah, so that would be genuinely brilliant. I've seen enough of her to know that I haven't seen a whole lot of her, but I've seen enough of her to know that I think I could be pretty comfortable with her as president. I know for a certain fact. She was born in Jamaica, so she can't be POTUS. Well, that's about that. Well, people saying Vivek is the only choice for VP. Christy Nome would be like having Romney as VP, be another rhino disaster. Yeah, Nome has let me down. Winsome Sears. Boy, what's a great name, isn't it? Winsome Sears. So, right now, if I had to put my money on it, I'd go with Vivek on this one. That just seems like the most likely choice now, but a lot of things can happen. But Trump was, man, he's like a dynamo. He was really, yeah, she's a Marine. That's good enough for me, generally speaking. Old school Marine. So Dave says, what did you think about Vivek's ideas about Russia and the Ukraine and Taiwan? And I thought it was the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And I talked about it on a previous show, so I'm not going to do any more violations of the 11th Amendment. Nevertheless, the question is, would Trump, really the most obvious question is, would Trump do better against Newsom than he would against Biden? And I just think he would, but I'm not 100% sure.
It comes down to who's hated more.
Well, yeah, but I'm not entirely sure about that because Newsom is slick. He's got that. He's unflappably reptilian. Old Gavin Newsom. He is. He's incapable of shame, and he's incapable of accepting any responsibility for this whole thing. He just simply asserts California's never been doing better, and he does it effectively because he's a pathological liar. And I don't know. I think if they went with this is kind of the challenge, if you're trying to figure out whether Trump would do better against Newsom or Biden, and the reason it's funny is because you have to figure out, if you're Trump, which one of these two has the worst record of the two. It's an embarrassment of riches, It's like, well, we could just destroy both of them on their record, obviously, yeah. But which one more? I think. Look, I'd much rather see Trump beat Biden. I'd much, really would like to see that. Really like to see that. And, whoever is telling Joe that he's going to get in trouble, Joe may not be any problem getting Joe off the ticket. It's not going to be a problem with Joe because Joe will go wherever the ice cream is. But nevertheless, whoever is going to get Joe in trouble if he goes off is probably not going to give up without a fight. And I think I'm talking about Dr. Joe Biden, who's gone a long way for a, live-in babysitter, frankly, in my opinion. Are we getting a John Boyd interview? We are. Yes, we are. I have not gotten the date yet, but I was waiting until we got the little gift, which is here, and the plaque, which is here, and the cardboard cutout, which is here. So Johnny gets a call tomorrow. And Real Catherine says he's already beaten Biden once. That'd be the great thing about Trump winning in 2024. He'd be the first president since Roosevelt to win the presidency 3 times in a row. And that would be kind of fun. So we'll see. Moving on. I think I covered most of this. Hey, Bill, I mentioned a few weeks ago that you need to look into Vivek Ramaswamy. Here's another video recommendation. Sit down for a great interview with James O'Keefe. Please start looking into Vivek. I have looked into him a little bit. I was not impressed with hey, let's just hand Ukraine over to Putin, so that way Putin will promise not to, be playing ball with China, which struck me as shockingly naive. Now I'm going to get piled on for me basically saying it's not what he said, but it seemed to me to be basically what he was saying. But I do think, Henry, we pretty much covered that one, so we're going to just kind of move along here, I think. Oh, this is always fun, because I love the introduction. This is like, it's got a nice kind of I feel like whenever I get a question from Charles Tome, I always feel like, before I read the question, I feel like Evel Knievel, on the ramp, and before the jump comes, you're going to get some actual action prior to the actual jump. So here we go. From an undisclosed location in flyover country where constitutional carry is the law, and municipal, state, and federal buildings must provide armed security if they pose no firearms restrictions. See what I mean? You're on the ramp, and already people are on their feet cheering. Darth Chuck the Merciless screams into the abyss, with the supposed governor of New Mexico stammering on CNN to justify knee-jerk tyranny, and then on the same day, a Biden-appointed judge issues an injunction against her unconstitutional executive order banning concealed or open carry. The question is thus: will the screeching moonbats continue to escalate in their attempts to do away with the Bill of Rights, or will they return to their older and more successful insidious habits of embedding minor rules and regulations in innocuous spending bills and agency rules interpretations? Are we better off with overt, sensational, huge violations, or tiny incremental losses hidden in the shadows? Well, they can't win on the overt, sensational, huge violations. They've just been shot down left and right. Carrie Lake is a good choice, actually. Carrie Lake for VP. That was something I was thinking of for quite a while. And the reason I'll come right back to you here, Darth Chuck. But Carrie Lake is an interesting choice because she's smart, and Carrie and Trump together can basically say, we both know what the American electoral system is. And they can both get out there if they really got their acts together, and they can basically say, here's what happened. Here's the facts of what happened. Boom, 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 boom. Trump was talking about this in South Dakota. He said it's election day 2022. Republicans go to vote. Oh, our machines are broken. Democratic machines aren't broken. Their Republican machines are broken. And it takes, 4 weeks before they could find enough votes for Carrie Lake to be defeated? Okay. I think you could run those two together, because I don't think either one of them plays it like a martyr. I think they just play it as people who've been wronged and are pissed off, and rightfully so, and gunning for it. And you'll get some percentage of independent women will vote for the Republican ticket if they think that the chance of the first female vice president being Carrie Lake as opposed to Kamala Harris. And I have to tell you, I think the reason I like Carrie would be interesting is because I would just pay such real money to be there at the vice presidential debates if it was Carrie Lake and Kamala Harris. I just would be. I can't imagine higher sport than that. If it is Biden and Harris again, Trump's debates with Biden. I think I've mentioned this before. If it were me, I would just start every debate with saying something like, Joe, before we start tonight, I'm going to give you a number to remember, 1826, okay? That's the number for our debate tonight, 1826. Or you can come up with a number if you want to, 4-digit number if you want. And at the end of the night, I'm going to ask you what that number is, and no checking your little earphone now. Yeah, so anyway. So back to the concealed carry, open carry thing. One of the things that I think is most damning against Newsom is that you got to give him credit. I mean, when a lizard does lizard things, he's being a good lizard. And this business on Newsom's part of adding a constitutional amendment that doesn't overturn the Second Amendment, just adds nuances to it. We're going to add a 28th Amendment that's going to add some kind of special modernization of the Second Amendment, which is so outdated. The entire strategy there is what Newsom and the progressives are trying to do is say, well, now the Constitution has one amendment that says that people can have can bear arms, and another amendment that says, well, they really can't. And now you have competing amendments, you see, and that's what he's trying to do with that. I think that's going to be a something that they can just take him apart on, just absolutely take him apart on. And the way I would take him apart on it if it were me, with the open carry thing and Newsom's 28th Amendment thing is, I think I just shame him. I just call him out and say, so look, Gavin, we all know that you don't like guns. I mean, in the hands of regular people, because your security team is extremely highly armed and everything about you is about not having to live the way that other people live. That's why you get to go to these global warming conferences in private jets, and that's why you don't have to walk through human filth and needles when you're mayor of San Francisco, and that's why California can turn into a dung heap so long as you get to have your $900 haircut. So we understand where you're coming from on this. I get that. But it does seem kind of cowardly, Gab, you don't mind if I call you Gab, do you? For you to simply say that you're so against the Second Amendment that you've decided you want to create another amendment that kind of just sort of, I mean, what I'm saying is, Gavin, why don't you just have the guts to come out and repeal the Second Amendment? That's what you want, and that's what your supporters want. So why not just come out and say what you want? Why don't you just do that? I suspect it's because you know, and I know, and everybody else knows, that America's not going to buy this. And I don't even think California's going to buy it anymore after what you've done to California, Gav. I really don't. I'll come out of character now for a second and say I am less worried about overturning the Second Amendment now than I have at any point in my political commentary career. And that's because we are approaching the end of the unraveling period and starting to enter the crisis period. And even in the last year, no more than two, but even really the last year, some of the most vocal, vehement advocates for defunding the police have been beaten up, carjacked, attempted rapes. They are suddenly looking around and saying, my God, as society continues to unravel, as the fabric of society continues to unravel, there's no denying that's happening. As New York and San Francisco become more and more and more lawless, even the liberals who live in those places are starting to pay attention. One thing that's interesting about being a California conservative, and I wasn't here to see it myself, but I know a lot of people who first-person stories that during the Rodney King riots out here, and this was a very, very different country back then, very different country. 92? 92, I want to say. Yeah, somewhere in there, 91, 92, maybe early 93, but I think it was 91, 92, I forget. In any event, during the Rodney King riots in L.A., 92. Thank you, a number of my people who became conservative friends of mine much later in life said that during those riots, when you could look at L.A. burning from the Hollywood Hills, just look out over the city and just see everything on fire, a lot of my conservatives got calls from their very liberal friends asking them if they had any extra weapons that they could hold on to for a couple of days. And the hypocrisy of that has been eclipsed in my life only by the people on the View saying, we got to do something about getting these illegal aliens out of here because they're causing all kinds of crime and just making life impossible. So these are people who would look down on conservatives as a bunch of knuckle-dragging, murderous, barbarian, stupid dimwits, not evolved enough to understand that that's what we have police or your private security for. And when everything was burning and it looked like the fire was coming their way, all of a sudden, all of these progressives got real interested in the ability to defend themselves. And I would have simply said, you know what? I'm not going to send you a pistol. I will send a yard sign that says that due to your strong belief in gun control, your house is unarmed and unprotected, and that you welcome open borders and no doors or gates or restrictions. That's what I would have sent him. But Infidel 42 talks about, I had that tragic boating accident where all of my firearms went overboard, but Infidel 42 had even larger catastrophe. He said, my firearms mysteriously disappeared in a bizarre stamp collecting accident. And how many times has that happened to us, really? You'd think we'd be more careful with our stamps. I can't count the number of people who've lost significant amount of money in weaponry that just stamp collecting accident. And, what else can you say? You be careful with those stamps, otherwise you hurt yourself. So I'm not really worried about it. And I think, to be honest with you, Darth Chuck, the bite back in New Mexico, their reaction to it sounds like a dog that's just kind of, and then somebody smacked them, and it's like, this is what, and but by the way, so bears mentioning and remembering, every time we fight back against these people, they back down. Every time we actually fight back, they back down. So law and order is going to be the issue in 2024. And it doesn't matter who the Democrats run. Trump's going to own that. And there's a lot of people out there who've seen already, we're going to get some votes on the transgender thing. We're going to get significant amount of votes on the men competing against your daughters in swimming events aspect. We're going to pick up a lot of votes there. And it's going to get worse between now and then. So lawlessness in the city will increase. We're seeing already things coming out of New York City that I haven't seen since the 70s. 74, 75. New York is just looking like the pit that it was when it was governed by Democrats for decades before a Republican came along, cleaned things up. And inflation, gas prices. When I say inflation, I mean, honestly, I went to McDonald's the other day and I got a medium fries, an apple pie, and a Sprite, and it was $8. That's crazy. Like a Whopper Junior with cheese and a Sprite is like $11. This is everywhere, and gas out here is 5 something a gallon. And the electric car, the entire electric car idea is just falling down in front of our eyes. They're trying to sell these things to people, and people bought them. There's a lot of people out there who bought electric cars because they thought it was the right thing to do. And I think it was Trump in South Dakota who said, who would have guessed that sometimes people want to drive for more than an hour? And I thought, this guy's, he's got it. He's going to go.
I do. I'm here.
And so, I don't know. The most important statistic I've heard, now I listened to a lot of statistics in 2022 too, so God knows you can still be brokenhearted about these things, but in the 21st century, Republicans have been plus in terms of who identifies as Republican, who identifies as Democrats. There's only been 2 years when Republicans have been up over Democrats, and I forget what those 2 years were, but I think maybe 2009 was one of them, where Republicans were up, were +2 relative to Democrats. I don't know what they were in the 2020 election. I think the Democrats were +6. But the last I heard, Republicans are +6. I don't think they've ever been +6, and I suspect they're higher now. So if most people identify as Republicans have always been fewer people have identified as Republicans than Democrats since the beginning of the 20th century, I think. And that's the kind of tidal shift, that's the kind of shift that really counts. And of course, the question comes up, is it enough to beat the cheating? Trump thinks it's possible to beat the cheating. And I would guess that probably nobody knows as much about that as he does. As I've said, the states that have the biggest cheating problems are ones that we wouldn't win anyway. And I remember on the morning of the 2022 elections at 10 o'clock in the morning where they said that they were that voting machines were just plain shut down in Arizona. I just felt like sick to my stomach. But I don't think that they'll be able to do a sneak attack on us like they did before. I don't think that they're going to get to just plain close these centers overnight and, we're just going to stop counting tonight. All those people left the State Farm Center. I can never remember what the State Farm or the All-State Center, the counting farm, the place in Georgia, the big election center. It's time to go home. We're closing the place. So everybody went home. That's not going to happen again. So we'll see. So in any event, I think the Second Amendment is not only safe, I think the Second Amendment is stronger than it has been. And Rivera points out, Bill, you said they can only get away with this once. Well, that's true. I did say that. And it was pretty depressing. So probably should say that I think they can only get away with this once unless you're in Arizona, in which case you could probably get away with it as many times as you want to. But Trump's biggest applause line was, we're going back to one day, election day, paper ballots across the country. And if we do that, then we will have navigated this crisis. So we'll see. Moving on, Chris Taylor. The Biden junta just put a price on all overseas Americans' heads by paying Iran $6 billion for 5 U.S. hostages prisoners. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? It's not a bad deal, if you're in the kidnapping business. $1,200,000,000 per American. I know we're worth it, but that's not something you want to advertise, man. Oh, for the love of God.
Shapiro said that you're just advertising to kidnap Americans.
Well, yes, and you don't have to be Ben Shapiro to figure that out. It's okay. All right. When I was talking to Dick Lanham, who's a guy who really made a large contribution to us in 2019, and wonderful, wonderful man who worked for the CIA back when the CIA was defending America. He was terminally ill, and I flew out to Norway to thank him personally and spend 4 days with him, I guess about 3 weeks before he died. And Dick and I sat and talked about what the agency was like and what the agency did in the 60s, and mostly in the 60s, and what the rules were. And he told me a story. And I'm very, very pleased he responded the way to this that he did. But here's how he laid it out to me. He said he was in Lebanon, I think it was maybe the 70s or early 70s. And there was a period where in Lebanon, there were these militia groups kidnapping foreigners in exchange for money. It was probably 10 grand or 100 grand in those days, something like that. And there were a number of kidnappings, and governments would simply pay for them, including our government, apparently. And Dick told me that one day they made the mistake, one of these, what were they called? They weren't militias, almost got it. Anyway, one of these Libyan factions, gosh darn it. Anyway, one of these Libyan factions made the mistake of kidnapping a Soviet diplomat for hostage money. And Dick told me that the people that had kidnapped a number of foreign nationals had kidnapped a Soviet diplomat and called the Soviet embassy in Lebanon and told them, we want this amount of money for this guy. And then there was a delay while they got the station chief on the phone. It was KGB, obviously. And he basically said to the people on the other, he basically gave them the Liam Neeson speech, almost verbatim. I wouldn't be surprised if that's where they got it from. He basically said, you will return our diplomat by 6 p.m. today, unharmed, or we will kill every one of you, and we will kill every member of your family that we can find. And he hung up the phone. And the Druze militia, that's what Kent was thinking of, I guess. Anyway, Dick said that these poor idiots had been so conditioned by Western power that we're not going to negotiate with, okay, that they thought that they were bluffing, but they weren't bluffing. And when the money didn't come, I think they did return the diplomat. And then the KGB went and found every one of these people and killed every one of them. And then they killed every one of their family members too, all of their kids, all of their grandkids, their wives, their mothers, anyone they could find. They went out and killed them all. And Dick said, and from that point on, there was no kidnapping of any Soviet personnel in Libya. And this is where I got really proud of my country. And I said, Spetsnaz. KGB was, Red Runner says it was Spetsnaz. I'm sure Spetsnaz did the operation, but it was KGB that figured out who to go get. And so I said to Dick, because there's a point to be made for this, right? I mean, there's a pretty good point to be made for this. And I said to Dick, I said, well, what do you think about that, Dick? He said, what do you mean? I said, do you think that would be something that pays off? I mean, do you think that's something America should do or should have done? He says, we don't kill children. And I thought, you goddamn right we don't. Good for you, man. I knew you didn't. It's just nice to hear it, you know? It's just nice to hear it from a guy who would be happy to kill some of these people. So there's a long way between not killing children and saying, yeah, sure, we'll write $1 billion for every American you kidnap. Here's $1 billion. And okay, all of these things are going to come home to roost. And since these chickens are coming home to roost, I hope they come home to roost in the coming year. Not because I want them to come home to roost, but because they're going to. And I want them to come home to roost while the person who let those chickens out in the first place is still in office. The rundown, the final report on the amount of equipment we left in Afghanistan boggles the mind. We left the Taliban with something like the fourth biggest armed force in the world, something along those lines. We left, when you read it, your first impulse is to think, I didn't think the Army had that many vehicles, period. But what we left there, 87 billion, says Furball. And the things that we left, 100 plus helicopters, something like 8,000 Humvees or more. God knows how many weapons. And let's not forget, was it 16,000 night vision goggles, which are the things that always gave us the advantage over these savages? We owned the night. We could do anything we want to at the night. Well, we don't own the night anymore. Thanks, Joe. And I don't know how many surface-to-air missiles they got, and Lady Hawk says they're still in their boxes. So I'll tell you what I would do. I don't want to be the president. I want to be the Secretary of Defense because I'm not stable enough to be the president, and I think a good Secretary of Defense is a guy who's unstable in a certain direction. That's why he's not president. He's just coming up with ideas. Because if I'm the Secretary of Defense and Donald Trump's Secretary of Defense, and Donald Trump gets elected, I'm going to direct, first of all, I'm going to fire everybody who's a rank of, I'm going to fire everybody who's got a star on their shoulders. And I'm going to look carefully at the colonels. Every general is going to go. We'll lose some good people if we do that. We'll lose some good people if we fire all of the admirals too. We'll lose some. But we'll get rid of all of the problem. And we're going to take some healthy flesh with it. That's just the way it goes. Sometimes you have to amputate an arm to save the body, and that's what we have to do. If you've got gangrene, you can't cut where the gangrene is. You have to cut higher up, so you make sure you get it all. That's what I would do. I'd fire all of the generals and all of the admirals, every single person, every one of them, every flag officer in the country. They'd be cashiered, every one of them. Colonel Angus says Ted Nugent would make a great SecDef. Ted Nugent wouldn't hold a candle to me. He's got nothing on me for this position. So the first thing I do is get rid of those people. Then I talk to the colonels and the lieutenant colonels, and especially I'd be looking to promote battlefield commanders from Afghanistan and Iraq. I'd be looking for the people that were captains and majors in Afghanistan and Iraq. Those are the guys I'd be looking for. Battlefield commanders, I'd promote them immediately, and I'd promote them high. And then I would get a list of these guys together, and I would tell them, go talk to your guys and figure out the best way to do this. First of all, I would say anybody who's been forced out of the military because it's no longer a warfighting organization, you are welcome back to rejoin the military, and we will pay your back pay to the penny plus interest. That's how I would solve the recruiting problem. Anybody who left because it became untenable, I'd hire every single one of them back, and I'd pay them every penny that they would have been paid if they'd stayed in. It's quite a signing bonus for some of those people. In any event, then I would say, because I don't want to go to the president with an idea. I want to go to the president with a solution. And I would basically say to all of these guys out there, and I said, I'm talking mostly about Special Forces guys. I'm not talking about Special Forces guys executing this. We're going to execute this with the conventional forces of the United States, but I need precision in the targeting. So I want you Special Forces guys who've now been promoted, and we're going to not meet in the Pentagon. We're going to turn the Pentagon into a giant ice skating rink. But we are going to get together at various bases around the country, and we're going to figure out where all of these things are, and then I'm going to present a strike package to end all strike packages to the United States of America's history, and I'm going to present it to the president. And what I want, guys, is I want to know how we can use all of what's left of our surplus inventory, any old weapons that we really don't expect are going to be useful in a really highly kinetic conflict. I want to clear the shelves of everything that's been gathering dust, because we're going to have to buy a bunch of new stuff. A fair amount of our good stuff has gone to Ukraine now, so we got to stock up. I want to know how we can best empty the shelves of the ordnance that we have and take out every single item that we left in Afghanistan, every one of them. If we left 12,492 Humvees there, I want to know that there are 12,492 smoking carcasses on the ground when we're finished with this operation. That's what I want to know. And then I'm going to take this to the president. I'm going to say, Mr. President, we can do this. We can do this in 24 hours. I don't mean 24 hours from now, 24 hours around the clock, total time 24 hours. We'll get 85% of them in 24 hours. And if you give us 72 hours, we'll get them all. And then I would basically say, here's a number of plans. This is the one I recommend. If you sign on the dotted line, everything we left there will be gone. And whoever's driving it's going to be gone too. And then I would just sit back and watch the president and decide what he wanted to do. But I'd have every single one of those plans in place. I wouldn't use anything that was high shelf item unless I had to. If I had to, I'd use it. But basically, I would use all of what's left of our dumb weaponry. I would just basically clear. I'd clear and this cannot be stressed often enough. One of the conditions would be, with the possible exception of Special Forces. In fact, with the likely exception of Special Forces, because those guys want to go. They're the deadliest soldiers that have ever lived on this earth. With the exception of a very small number of select Special Forces raids, we're not putting a boot on the ground. We're not going to have a single U.S. serviceman touch the soil of Afghanistan unless they're going in on a rubber boat at nighttime and coming out on a rubber boat the same night. We're not putting anybody on the ground. We're not going to rebuild anything. We're not going to do anything other than put smoking holes where all of these things used to be. And if we have to fly 747s over that country and drop 60,000 JDAMs at one time, then that's what we'll do. Because that's a pretty easy modification to make. In fact, I'd like to see that. I really would. I'd like to see 5 or 6 747 800s, brand new ones, right out of there. Take all the seats out. open up, give them a bomb bay, and have each one of these 747s carry 50 or 60,000 dumb bomb JDAMs. And we're not going to nuke them. Nukes are valuable. We're not going to nuke them because that would be escalation. And we are not going to start a nuclear war. We're not going to use nuclear weapons. We're not going to nuke them because we don't have to. I'd put out, not that we have to worry about Afghanistan, I'd take, well, if I really wanted to clear the skies, I'd probably take 20 F-22s, but I'm feeling generous, so I'd say 40. Put 40 F-22s out there flying high cover. I'd put the F-35s back there for the suppression of whatever, long-range suppression, whatever anti-aircraft devices they have. And then I would fly those 747s over the country in one wave. It would take about an hour to go from one end to Afghanistan to the other. And these 747s would drop 200,000 JDAMs. And boom, 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 boom. And then we'll say, okay, that's how we should have done it a couple months ago, years ago. But that's how we've done it. If you got a problem with that, you can come and speak to me. And that would have been the end of that. And no regime, that's exactly right. AOC said, no regime change required. No, we're not interested in that. We've tried that. We've done that experiment. We're not interested in it anymore. We don't care anymore. You're just not going to keep this stuff. We're going to get all of it. We're not going to get it back. And we're not going to even try to get it back because we could lose some lives trying to get it back. It's gone. It's off the books. It's $84 billion that this old man frittered away so that he could have his little publicity stunt in front of the 9/11 Twin Tower monuments. But we didn't forget about this. And what I would do, the main thing I'd concentrate the special forces on, and I would be willing to risk some lives for this. And I know that the guys, because I know some SEALs, and they'd be willing to risk their lives for this too. What I would do is, prior to the bombing raid, or maybe during it, because that would sow some serious confusion, I would dedicate significant resources to getting as many of our Afghan allies out of that country as we possibly could. I'd be willing to lose some SEALs for that. I'd be willing to trade some lives for that. Because those people, I'm sick and tired of having our country sell out our allies. I'm sick and tired of it. I can't stand it anymore. I couldn't stand it when we did it to South Vietnam. I can't stand it. I can't bear it. I would be willing to go. I'm not saying I want to lose those guys, but I'd be willing to, that's what I'd be willing to put some helicopters in there for. And I would find every one of those people that we could possibly save, and I'd get them all together, and I'd get as many of them out of there as I possibly could. And the last thing I would drop on Afghanistan, on the Taliban, would be a large number of flyers that say, if we find that you have hurt one individual, if there's one reprisal against one of the people that you're holding after this corrective action of ours, then you're going to see what a 21st century industrial power can do when it's angry. Right now, we're not angry. Right now, we're just evening the books. But if you decide that you want to launch a witch hunt against the people we couldn't get out of there, as a matter of fact, I've changed my mind. Pray that I don't change it further. I want those people out of the country, and I want them out of the country within 72 hours. And if you don't let them go, then we're going to come back. And this time, we're not going to be using obsolete weapons. And we're not going to be targeting vehicles. We're going to be targeting you. You personally. Now, get on it. Bunch of savages. Yeah, the Whittle bombing leaflet. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Where's Curtis LeMay when you need him? Okay, moving on. I'm glad I got that out of my system. $1 billion, $1.2 billion per American. Okay, Joe. Yeah, this is how I think. See, this is why I'd be an excellent Defense Department secretary, because if I was president, this is what I'd want to do anyway. And I'm smart enough to know that this is not the way to win all the time. But there needs to be somebody on the team who's thinking like I do. 5708 Rivera says we should make an example to Iran by sinking their entire navy. Couldn't agree more. Next time that there's an unprovoked attack on anything, I would say, I understand that you did this because you thought there would be no consequences. And because there haven't been consequences, it's not fair for me to say this until you've done this. So now that you've done this, let me make this clear. The next time that this kind of thing happens, You will lose your military. You will lose your military. We won't hit any civilian targets, but every air base you have, every surface vessel you have, every aircraft you have, it is all going to go away. We will leave you naked in front of the world. If you do this again, I am promising you, I give you my personal word of honor, that you will lose your sword. So don't F around with us anymore, because those guys are gone, and now you're going to have to deal with real Americans again, because those Marxists are out on the freaking sidewalk where they belong. Please try me. Please. There's nothing I want better. I've been waiting for this moment since 1979. There's your warning. There's your line in the sand. Is this a threat? Yes, it's a threat. I'm so glad you caught that. Are we threatening you? We're certainly threatening you. Yes, we are. We are threatening you in the clearest possible manner that I possibly can. So let me restate that. This is a threat. If this, then this. Period. No discussion. And you can get as angry about it as you want to. You have not seen us angry. You don't want to see us angry. So stop dicking around. I wouldn't have to say anything to China after I said those things, because once those two things had been said, once you do that Afghanistan sweep, your problems with China are pretty much over. They're over. You know why? Because China can't do that. That's why. China can't do that. Bless you. Rivera says, I joined in 81 because of the Iran hostage crisis. I remember those days so clearly. I'm so bloody tired of this humiliation. So sick of it. And I'm tired of us acting like we're powerless in a world where we have restrained ourselves through our own decency, and it's gone beyond decency now. Not murdering women and children is restraining yourself through decency. Not standing up for yourself like this is suicidal self-hatred, and I didn't catch it, you didn't catch it, and now freedom's got a voice again, and we're gonna blow that silver trumpet loud. You'll remember this administration when we're done. As he says, I was on Midway on Gonzo Station. And Lady Hawk says, I was in Germany when all that came down. Yep, a promise and a threat. See, this is it. Yeah, we do that Iran, Putin, and Xi, we'll go holy effing S. We don't have to even do it to Putin. I wouldn't touch him. I wouldn't touch him. I think he's managed to dig his own grave there. We don't need to get involved with that. I think I've said this before, and I'll say it again. People say, "Oh, you're going to lose our guys in Ukraine." I have no interest and no desire. I think it'd be suicidal and monstrously stupid to send American troops to Ukraine. However, being a student of history, I know that we lost 57,000 or 58,000 Americans killed during the Vietnam War, and they were killed by Russian weapons. The air crews were shot down by Russian fighter jets and Russian surface-to-air missiles. We could have defeated Vietnam in 3.5 days if it had not been for Russian weapons. The Vietnam War was fought against Russia using Vietnamese troops. And I have no problem, ethically or morally, to turn that equation around completely. 100% completely. You guys want to do the fighting? Deal. Here's a weapon. Go and do it. We've got to clear some of this stuff anyway. We've been sitting on our laurels for too long as far as our weapon systems go. We no longer have anything like the most advanced air-to-air missiles in the world. That's a shocking disgrace. They're in the pipeline, but pipelines are not useful if things happen today or tomorrow. I'd get the AIM-260 out there immediately. I'd give all of our aircraft, not just the stealth aircraft. In fact, there's some argument that the stealth aircraft can't carry them, which is fine with me because stealth aircraft can get close enough to use an AMRAAM-D. But I would give all the conventional vehicles, all of our F-15s, all of our F-16s, I'd give them the AIM-260s tomorrow, and I'd have them have the ability to shoot down enemy aircraft at 160 miles nautical range. 160 nautical miles range is what I was trying to say there before I blew a gasket. I would simply just do it. I'm playing with a bottle cap. I can't help it. It's my worry cap. This is what I use to soothe myself when I'm planning the destruction of the military regimes of terrorist nations across the earth that stand in the way of freedom. It's funny how easy it is to actually say that, isn't it? Really, without any embarrassment or shame or even feeling like I'm being bombastic or hyperbolic. I'm really not. I'm not. I mean it. I am immune to this infection, and so are you. And the beautiful thing about this, you see, is that we'd only have to do it once. And I don't mean we have to go in there and kill a lot of Iranians or even a lot of Afghanis for that matter. I'm not talking about that at all. I'm not talking about terror bombings. I'm not talking about bombing cities. I'm talking about precision strikes against the vehicles in the case of Afghanistan. And to be perfectly honest with you, I think not only would it make me personally happier, it's probably a more effective weapon, more effective action if nobody's in those vehicles when we hit them. That would be my preference. My preference would be they all be parked out there somewhere, and then boom, 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 they go away. And then they're just looking at smoke wreckage of the army that we gave them. And then they realize, well, they could have probably gotten us too if they wanted to. Yeah, we could have, but we're not those people. You're those people. Don't forget it. Because we do have stuff that's a little louder back home. There you go. From GK Masterson, here's some good news. Hey, Bill, I just finished my first home time break today. Congratulations. Last month out has been very educational. For those of you not familiar, GK Masterson's been a huge part of our Stratosphere Lounge family and has been an enormous help in terms of curating things, running some back-end problems on the website, all sorts of things. She's just been an absolute champ. She decided to start a new career as a truck driver, one of the most honorable professions on the face of the earth, in my opinion. As a person who spent a lot of time on the road and who's driven across this country at least six times, from sea to shining sea, I have the highest respect for truck drivers. I think trucks are the corpuscles of the United States economy and country. Just their economic value alone is nothing works. The country dies without trucks. Trucks are the red blood cells that carry oxygen to the country, and they do it 24 hours a day. And I'm so damn proud of them. And what they do is great. And the culture, the highway trucker culture, is just, if not, it certainly rivals the military and may in fact surpass today's military when it comes to just a repository of patriotism and individualism and rebellion against useless authority. I don't think there's a professional truck driver out there who thinks that we should not have speed limits on the road. But I think most of them think that speed limit should be about 70 or somewhere in that neighborhood. And furthermore, that's not the same thing as all of these freaking scales and and tags and weights and all of that. I think every single truck driver on the road, for example, so you just don't know, I'm not an unreasonable bombastic warmonger. I'm a reasonable bombastic warmonger. I think that virtually every truck driver must appreciate the fact that U.S. trucks have those little flip signs that indicate what the truck is carrying, so that if the truck should overturn, firefighters know whether they're dealing with dry ice or whether they're dealing with kerosene or whatever. All of this makes sense to me. By and large, this industry is so overregulated that I would just clear all of that kudzu away. Department of Transportation, gone. Department of Education, gone. Department of Energy, gone. In fact, if it's not in the Constitution, it's pretty much gone. We would need something like an FBI and something like a CIA, and I think they should be separate. That's the challenge. That's where not having this sorted out prior to 9/11 got us 9/11, and what we did after 9/11 got us to this police state we have today. But somewhere in there, it must be possible for patriotic people constrained by government and who take their oath to the Constitution seriously to find a way to make sure that the domestic counterintelligence agency, counterinsurgency agency, and interstate crime agency, formerly known as the FBI, can communicate with the exclusively overseas intelligence agency, formerly known as the CIA. Without them, getting the idea that they own the country. I was talking earlier about my friend Dick Lanham, who worked for the CIA for many years for the agency. Well, the agency, obviously, the initials, they call it the company, but they used to refer to the CIA as standing for Christians in Action. And aside from telling me that he doesn't recognize the agency that he used to work for, he also told me the story that that they were faced. This is from a guy who's several weeks away from his last breath, and he knows it. He knows he's in his last few weeks in the world. And he and I talked about things. So on some degree, this was, I don't want to say it was a deathbed confession. All I'm saying is he didn't have anything to protect anymore. He certainly didn't give me anything that was even approaching a secret, but he could be brutally honest with me and frank about this. So he had no reason to lie to me. He had no reason to shade anything. And so he wouldn't have to sweeten up stories just to impress me, because he could tell I liked it when they were unsweetened. But to give you an idea of this sense of separation of domestic versus foreign intelligence operations, he told me that they had a situation where they had, in a room, they had Jane Fonda. I'm virtually sure he said Tom, what's that little commie twerp's name? You know who I'm talking about. Jane Fonda's boyfriend at the time, and a number of other not left-wing Americans, communist Marxist Americans. And they, was it Hayden, Tom Hayden? Yeah. And a number of other radicals. And he was stationed, my friend Dick was stationed in Thailand, which was the inbound station. If you wanted to get to Vietnam, you had to go through Thailand. And that's the CIA office he worked at. And he said that they had Hayden, Fonda, and a number of other top-level left-wing Americans, some leaders of the Black Panther Party, all of them, in a room, and that they had the room bugged, but that they were not listening to the conversation because these were American citizens. They couldn't record it, and they couldn't listen in on it because it was against the rules. And I think what they said was, yes, but two of these guys there are French. They're French Marxists who are conspiring to undermine our effort in Vietnam. And there was a big discussion about whether or not that allowed them to listen in on this. But I was so impressed by the fact that here, got them cold, you know. Here are these anti-American Americans in a hotel room in Thailand. And the CIA at the time, in the 60s, had enough integrity to say, we sure would like to listen to that conversation. We surely would, but we are forbidden to listen to that conversation. However, I think they said to them with a bit of a grin, you know, oh, there are French people there? Oh, we are allowed to listen to them. So we can just listen in on the French people. And, you know, it's not like we're going to spy on Americans. I really, really, really admired those guys. I really admired that line that they walked. I thought it was great. I've told this story before. I'm going to tell it again just because, out of respect for Dick's memory, because to me it's the essence of what I would want my intelligence service to be overseas. You know, smart but not cruel, tough but not cruel, that kind of thing. So Dick was he started out as an underwater demolitions man, a precursor to the SEALs. In one of the Cold War episodes, I talk about these two guys that went in to do hydrographic studies of a harbor in Vietnam, North Vietnam, and that they swam in using rebreathers with no bubbles. This was an active enemy harbor. It's be about 65, I think, prior to the Gulf of Tonkin. And we thought, well, we might need to know what these harbors, we might need to know the layout of the harbor underneath the water, because we may have to actually go ashore here, so who knows. So these guys went in secret, and in the episode on the Cold War where I talked about them, you got two guys. It's pitch black. It's a moonless night, and they are 25, 30 feet below the surface, and they have to swim in using flippers and stuff and their rebreather's 6 or 7 miles. It's a long, long, long way. And they have to do it underwater. And he said, so here's how we did it. We took about 10 feet of clothesline. It was actual clothesline. Those of you who were younger than this never touched the stuff before. There's nothing magic about it. It's just kind of a plastic.
Don't consult me. I know what clothesline is.
It's like having some kind of a, I don't know. It's like having a heckler in a pipe organ, you know, or maybe it's like a bird. You're playing something on the pipe organ, and there's a bird that's trapped in one of the pipes, and all of a sudden this thing comes out. So he said we took 10 feet of clothesline, and we tied it to our belts, and we started swimming, and the two guys were in the water, in the dark, and one guy had they both had both, but one guy was looking at his depth meter. He had a phosphorescent glowing depth gauge on his arm. And his job was to make sure they stayed at, let's say, 20 feet below the surface. If they started getting deeper than that, he'd just kind of stay up there, and then the other guy would feel the tug on the line, and he'd come back up. If the other guy got too high, this one guy's just looking at the depth, and he's holding 20 feet or whatever. The other guy had both on his arm too, but the other guy's looking at his compass, and he's just swimming east, southeast. That's it. That's all he's doing. If the other guy starts going off on one way or another, that's it. So one guy's watching the depth, the other guy's watching the direction, and they end up right where they want to be. And as Dick told me the story, and as I said in the Cold War series, that one particular night, there was that rare, which you have not seen. If you haven't seen it, it's one of the most amazing things in nature. Those nights where bioluminescence lights up. And I thought it was kind of a green color, but it's electric blue. It's just the most beautiful blue you've ever seen. And these are these little bioluminescent organisms, and when there's a disturbance in the water, they all think, wow, something's going on, so they all light up. And I know what these things look like because I saw them with my own eyes at about 2 o'clock in the morning on a fishing boat with Steve Crowder in Guantanamo Bay. That's how I know what that photoluminescence looks like. Steve Crowder and I were out in a fishing boat taking fish out of Fidel's Bay, 2009 or 10 or something, back in the PJTV days. And you could see the line going into the water, and where the current was flowing past the line, which is these electric blue eddies. And when a fish would hit one of the hooks or something, you'd see like this flash of blue. So these guys are underwater, and they realize, my God, we're leaving this blue wake here. This isn't good. And he said they were just swimming along, and as they got closer to the shore, there's a lot of sharks in waters off of Vietnam. They said they just looked off to their side, and all of a sudden there was like this torpedo-shaped blue wall, like some enormous blue glowing thing. They never saw it. They just saw this blue glow, and it passed them in the water, and then they just saw like these where its tail's going. And its tail's not going up and down. Those are the good kinds. Side to side, bad. Up and down, good. So it wasn't a dolphin, it wasn't a whale, it was a big, big, big frickin' shark. Anyway, so Dick said he was working at the office in Thailand, and their job was to make sure that anybody going from Bangkok into Saigon, the CIA was interested in any of the foreign nationals going into and coming out of Saigon, and about the only way you could get there was through Bangkok. So that's what they did. And they had a bunch of Dave Big Booty for the internet win this evening. He says, and that's why Charlie don't surf. No, that's exactly why Charlie don't surf. But he wish he would. So they're looking at every manifest of every plane that's going into Hanoi. They're looking at, and they don't see anything there. And they get this one guy's name kind of comes up, and they go, something about this guy. We're not sure what it is. Something. So they see this name, they're not sure what it is, and they think it's got something to do with he's a Japanese national. So Dick gets on the phone, calls the CIA Japan office, and says, hey, we're about to clear this flight through, and we got this guy so-and-so on there. Are you interested in him? Oh, yes, we're interested in him. Hell, yes, we are interested in with him. He is the number one communist agitator in Japan. He's the guy who's planned some of these terror attacks and these gas attacks. He is a bad guy. We're very, very, very interested in him. Okay. So what do you want to do? Well, we want to talk to him. Okay, well, he's about to get on a plane, in 8 hours or 12 or whatever the hell it was. And they said, we'd really, really, really like to talk to this guy. Okay. So he hangs up the phone and they figure out what they're going to do. And he said, just through luck, the station rotation, he said there was a guy there, worked for the agency, and he was a forger. He said, this guy was so good that not only could he just look at your signature and reproduce it perfectly, but he was so good that if you gave him a fine enough pen, he could essentially draw like a dollar bill out of a piece of paper. And unless you really looked at it closely, you'd buy it. He's just an insanely talented guy. So he happened to be in Thailand at the time. So he said, okay. So they started putting their heads together, and these guys in the agency started to get together a plan. So this guy, we'll call him Mr. Well, just for the sake of it, we'll call him Mr. Yamamoto. This is Mr. Yamamoto, a young Marxist, in his 30s or 40s. He's going into Hanoi. Then he's going to go find a way to he's going into Saigon. He's going to find a way to get into Hanoi, and he's going to cause some mischief there because he's a frickin' communist. So they got together, and here's what they decided to do. They knew that this guy had something in his briefcase and that he was not going to let that briefcase go. He wasn't handcuffed to it because that would have been too obvious, but he never put it down, ever. Because the Thai people, being trusting and naive, decided to side with Uncle Sam on this one. They hadn't run into Democrats yet, apparently, but nevertheless, they would. But at that time, the Thai police force was 100% on our side, on the side of the CIA. So they said, all right, here's what we're going to do. So this guy was staying at a hotel, and they knew that if they arrested him, he would know that the jig is up. They can't just arrest him. They can question him, but they can't torture him. They can't get any information out of him. They wanted to know what was in his briefcase, but they wanted to know what was in his briefcase without him knowing that they knew what was in his briefcase. This is Mission Impossible. This is really, really, really what happened. It's exactly like Mission Impossible episode. So here's what they decided to do. They knew that if they arrested him, he'd be immediately suspicious. So what they did was they waited till they had a couple of agents in place, Thai agents. And just as this guy is either coming into or out of the hotel, I forget which, there's this fight that starts out on the street between these two guys. And they're really throwing punches. They can't fake this, right? They're really, really, really getting into it. Pounding each other, knocking each other's teeth in. And one of them punches him into this guy on purpose. Just knocks him back, doesn't damage him or anything like this, right? And this fight's going on, all of a sudden, the police arrive, the Thai police arrive. They separate these guys, throw them into the clink, put them in the cars, drive off with them. And then the police officers are going around and they're interviewing everybody, and they stop 2 or 3 people and they say, you saw this whole fight? Well, to Yamamoto says, yes. He said, one of them bumped into you? Yes. Well, this guy is a wanted criminal, and we're going to need you to come down to the station. We just need to ask you some questions. It's going to take about 15 minutes, but we need you to come down and do this. Well, you have to, sir, because you are an on-the-scene witness in this crime, and so you have to come down to the station and identify this person because this guy's a bad guy, needs to go to jail. So the guy agrees. So they get him to the police station, and they say, I understand your concern, and so on and so forth. Here's a locker. They give him a locker. They take the locker, give him the key, hand him the key. Then they take him into this room, and they interview him for about 25 or 30 minutes, and they figured that's about all the time they had, because if there's any longer than that, he's going to start getting suspicious. So they take him into this room, they give him a key, and the instant this guy gets behind that closed door, the CIA guys go into the locker, they take out another key for the locker, take the thing out, they've got their gloves on, pull the briefcase out, take it into a room, and lock the door. They used brand new state-of-the-art technology called the Polaroid camera, which had just been invented a year or two earlier. And for those of you who don't remember film, you would take a picture on film and you'd advance the film, and then you had to develop the film. And even if you had your own darkroom, that's a couple-hour process. But the Polaroid camera was amazing. And when we first got it, we were all amazed too. We just take a picture and out would pop the thing. The very first ones, you had to smear some chemicals on it, but pretty soon, out comes the picture, and you look at it, and in about space of, 40 seconds, the image would just develop out of thin air. It's Polaroid. Yeah, you shake it. Sometimes you have to shake it, make it go a little faster, get some air over it or something. So it was an instant camera. Not a digital camera. It was just a instant image. So they got a guy who's good with locks. They pick the locks on the suitcase, flop the suitcase open. Everybody's got their gloves. They open the suitcase. The first thing you do, take a Polaroid picture, put it down. They take one item out of there very carefully, put it down, upside down, take another picture. And they do this until they get to this guy's diary. Now remember, what the guys in Japan, the CIA unit in Japan, they weren't concerned about what was in the briefcase. They wanted to talk to the guy, but they had to hold the guy. That's the problem. So what my friend Dick and his fellow guys came up with was they kept taking these pieces out, and they finally got a hold of this guy's diary. And they had a translator there. They had a Thai translator, and they opened up this guy's diary, and they found the day, and he's already made his entry. I've arrived in, Bangkok and blah, 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 blah. And they found an area where there was a little bit of space. And then this forger, who didn't speak Thai, was given Thai characters. And he not only had to write the Thai characters in the diary, he had to write these Thai characters. He didn't know what these characters meant. He'd never seen them before. It's complete gibberish to him. But he had to take this couple of sentences written out in Thai, and he had to write them into this guy's diary. I guess they must have translated it into Japanese. Yes, that's what they did. He still didn't know what they were. So he has to not only write the Japanese, they were Japanese characters. He not only had to write the Japanese characters in the diary, he had to write the Japanese characters in the diary in this guy's hand, so it looked like every one of his other diary entries. So he just does this thing, he writes out 2-3 lines, okay? And then they close the diary, they put it back in, and then they check their Polaroid. Is it in the right place? Yes. They take this, they put it back in, they check the Polaroid. Is that in the right place? Yes. Put everything back in. Yes. Okay. Back in. Key out goes. Little signal goes to the room. The guy says, "Thank you very much. We're very sorry to have detained you so long. Let's go get your item." The guy walks back, opens up with his key. There's his briefcase. He goes back, and he goes back to the hotel. So the next day, he's about to get on the plane for Hanoi at Bangkok airport. And as he's about to get on the plane, he is accosted by Thai police. And the Thai police pull him off the plane and say, "You're under arrest." He said, "Under arrest for what?" He said, "Under arrest for trying to undermine the Thai government." He said, "You're insane. I'm not trying to undermine the Thai government. Come with us." They take him down to the police station, and then they open up his diary, and there in Japanese, in his handwriting, are a series of instructions about what he's going to do to help cripple the Thai government. And this guy looks at this, and he says, "I have no idea where that came from." "No, of course you don't. That's your handwriting, isn't it?" "Looks like my handwriting." And it does say, "I plan to do this, this, and this. We have a Japanese interpreter here, right?" "Yes." "Yeah." The guy's he's just so gobsmacked, he doesn't know what to say. So they locked him up on charges of trying to overthrow the Thai government for about a week, I think Dick said, a week or 10 days, something like that, which was enough time for the CIA guys from Japan to get there, ask him the questions they wanted to, and then they let him go. And I thought, man, that's just perfect, right? They didn't kill him. They didn't beat him up. They didn't torture him. They just plain skunked him. They just skunked him. They outthought him. They screen wrote him, is what they did. They turned him into a stooge. And, as a side benefit of this, at that point, he was no longer trusted by the Marxists back in Japan either, because he had had dealings with the CIA. That's how they got Dick told me this too. Carlos the Jackal was a kind of a freelance terrorist in the early 70s. And Carlos the Jackal had Dick said, the tightest security that we've ever encountered. His inner circle, he's wanted for mass murder, and he's wanted by 60 governments, including the United States and so on. And his organization was so tight and his security was so good that even after years, they could not get anybody in there. They couldn't get anybody in there to let them know where he was, because this guy was worth actually knocking off. He was a mass murderer. And they could not get anybody in. And then somebody in the CIA said, "Oh, I have an idea." And so what they did was they found a couple of his lieutenants, and they waited till they were walking down the street in a busy neighborhood. And then they would pull up beside this guy in their car, in their American car with these big government tags on it. And they'd roll down the window and they'd say, I don't know, Hassam, whatever this lieutenant, not Carlos, whatever one of his lieutenants was. "Hey, Hassam, how are you? What do you want?" "Nothing. We just thought we'd say hi. I don't want to talk to you." "No, I know. I know. We're from different cultures." They start chatting him up, right, for 2-3 minutes, and they drive off. And they kept doing this a couple times. And Carlos was so paranoid about his security that just the fact that these guys were seen talking to CIA agents, Carlos had them killed. He took out his entire top-level security guys, not because they'd leaked information, but because the CIA had convinced him that they had, because they were talking to his guys as if they were pals. That's just so bloody brilliant. It's so brilliant. This is the country I'm proud of, and this is the country I want to have back. Okay, so back to GK. Everybody's taking bets that I'm not going to finish these, and you're all going to lose your money, so it serves you right. So back to GK Masterson. I started my first home time break today. Last month out has been very educational. My question is this. Do you think Biden is trying to start a wag the dog scenario by potentially provoking a war with Russia? If so, how likely do you think it is that we wind up living in a world like the day after? Thanks, GK. Just because it's important. We didn't provoke a war with Russia. And Ukraine didn't provoke a war with Russia either. They just plain invaded. Now, certainly arming the Ukrainians is something that Vladimir Putin doesn't like. Certainly, he's going to make threats about that. But he also knows that there's no question in the entire world. There's not a public relations case to be made here. He invaded that country. He wasn't dealing with Ukraine. Crimea. He just took that by force in 2014, which was, of course, when we had a Democrat in office who undoubtedly was prepared to issue a strongly worded letter. He took Georgia in 2008, when the election was winding down just before Obama got elected, and he knew that Obama was going to win. Everybody knew Obama was going to win, and frickin' John McCain knew that Obama was going to win. So Vlad said, "I got a lot of feeling that this guy from he's not George Bush. He hadn't even heard of Donald Trump yet." So he just said, "Yeah, well, let's give it a try. And if the Americans start acting like they were serious, then we'll just back up." But they didn't, so they didn't. So I just think I'm not going to walk into a rhetorical trap by saying that the United States is provoking a war with Russia. Russia provoked a war with the world. That's what happened. Now, arming the Ukrainians, I think, is a superb idea, not because I think Ukraine is an example of Jeffersonian democracy. Not that at all. Not even because it's innocent or whatever. All I know is the most prominent fact staring me in the face from history is, if you do not stop aggressors like Vladimir Putin and Adolf Hitler, you will have opportunity to stop them and stop them and stop them and stop them. But if you let them keep going, they're going to take more and more and more, and then you will have to get involved. Then you will have to stop them with U.S. troops, because then it won't be Ukraine. It'll be either Poland or it'll be someplace else. So there you go. Now, I don't think that he's provoking war, but the bigger question is, do I think that this is going to lead to World War III? I heard Donald Trump talking about that. He said, "I'm the only guy that can avoid World War III," and I certainly agree that he's the guy that's most likely to end the discussion about World War III. But as a guy who spent a significant amount of his life studying World War III, and who did nearly a year's worth of research on the Cold War, after I came out of the Cold War, this is a controversial opinion, and obviously you don't want to be too, what's the name of that character? You don't want to just sit on this as if it's actual physical law. But as a person who studied the Cold War, when tensions were so high and there were 25,000 hydrogen weapons on each side, and on 2 occasions where Soviet officers were under direct orders to retaliate if they thought they were under attack, or else they would be shot and their families would be shot. On both those occasions, those Soviet officers did in fact see everything that looked to them like a signal that they were being attacked. There was a nuclear-tipped submarine, there was a conventional submarine in the Cuban Missile Crisis that had a single nuclear-tipped torpedo, and as the crisis is ending, the U.S. had a destroyer drop just test charges. They're like depth charges, but they've got the explosive power of a hand grenade. Just goes bang. It's just so they can hear where the charges go. It can't possibly damage anything. It's just a tiny little pop. It's a training device. Well, the Soviets didn't know that we had training devices, so the U.S. destroyer starts dropping these little pop depth charges to get the Russian sub to come up because the crisis is over. Well, they didn't know the crisis was over, and they're down there, and they think they're being depth charged by an American destroyer. Now, they have orders, direct orders. This is the thing about the Soviet Union you need to understand, and this is why I'm not so worried. I couldn't figure out why is it that all of the guys that saved the world were Soviets? How come no Americans stepped in and decided to save the world? Because the Russians did it twice. And I realized it's because America didn't have to. Soviet doctrine was so predicated on totalitarianism and fear and paranoia that Soviet doctrine was if A, then B. If A, then B. There's no decision in there. There's no consultation. There's no confirmation, nothing. If A, then B, or else you are killed and your family's killed. If A, then B. In the case of the Cuban Missile Crisis, if A, then B read, if you are under attack by an American destroyer, or if you are under attack by the Americans, you will use your nuclear torpedo against the nearest target. Those were their standing orders as they went into the crisis. That was what they were told. And when those diesel electric boats went down, they're down for like 3 days. They have no idea what's going on the surface. They just know all of a sudden they're being depth charged. If A, then B. We're being attacked by the Americans. Launch the nuclear torpedo. There were, I can't remember if it was 3 or 4 submarines in that flotilla. I want to say it was 3. And in order to launch, each one of these 3 diesel electric boats had one torpedo they had a number of torpedoes, but they had one torpedo on each boat with a nuclear weapon on the tip of it. And in order to fire that nuclear weapon, the captain and the executive officer had to agree. That's what was required to launch the nuclear torpedo. Because there was a flotilla, and on a 1 out of 3 chance, 1 out of 3, the submarine that was being depth charged didn't have 2 command officers on board, it had 3. It had the captain of the boat, it had the executive officer, and it also had the commander of the 3 subs, the commander of the flotilla. He was aboard that boat. And so when these test depth charges started to fall, the captain said, we're launching the nuclear torpedo. The executive officer said, I concur. Vasily Arkhipov, who had gained a great deal of respect because he was one of the guys that got K-19 home. He was one of those guys who sent those brave Soviet sailors into the nuclear reactor on the K-19 and had them use air conditioning parts to rig away so that the thing didn't melt through the bottom of the submarine. Every one of the 9 guys that went into that engineering compartment died within a few days. But Vasily Arkhipov was highly commended for this, and so he was given command of this 3-ship squadron of submarines during the Cuban frickin' Missile Crisis. And they were being attacked. If A was happening, then B. No discussion. And he refused to agree. He refused to agree to launch that weapon. He said, no. They said, we're being attacked. He said, I know that, but we're not launching this weapon. We're not going to do it. We're not going to do it. Because if we're wrong, it's the end of the world. And I'd rather be wrong. I'm telling you, you do not have my permission. And it was a damn near, I'm pretty sure this is where the entire plot for Crimson Tide came from now that I think about it. Because Crimson Tide's one of my favorite movies ever, because it's so perfectly written, so balanced. But he said no. And it came to blows practically. People were drawing guns on there. He said no. So they didn't launch the torpedoes against the U.S. Navy destroyer that was not, in fact, attacking them. And World War III didn't happen. Because if a nuclear torpedo had hit it and destroyed an American destroyer or other surface vessels while the Cuban Missile Crisis was in play after 13 days of increasing tension, then that almost certainly would have done it. Almost certainly. He just said no. Fast forward 25 years or something like this, and somebody else is going to have to give me the other name because I should have these things tattooed, these two names on my arm. I want to say it was 1987, but it was in that general vicinity. Now we're talking about a guy who's an Air Force colonel. He's commanding a missile base, just like we have missile bases throughout the Midwest with our Minutemen missiles there. Thank you. Stanislav Petrov is this fellow's name. We should remember these two names, Vasily Arkhipov and Stanislav Petrov, because if it hadn't been for these two men, we wouldn't be here. And this is my point, actually, to answer your question about this, GK. Same precise dynamic, different circumstances. Sometime around, he's working the night shift, and he's in command. He's not in command of an anti-missile system. He's in command of a strategic missile complex. He's got 25 or 30 intercontinental ballistic missiles at his command, and he too, like Arkhipov, has standing orders. If A, then B. And his standing orders are, if you detect an incoming American attack, you will launch on warning. What that means is, if you're not familiar with how the Cold War dynamic worked, every time that the nuclear war was gamed, it was obvious that whoever struck first had an enormous advantage. If you struck first, you could probably take out 70 or 80% of the enemy's nuclear inventory. It's called a decapitation strike. And the temptation to strike first was so great that this was the great concern of the Cold War, it was just such an advantage to shoot first. But then that begs the question of who wants to be responsible for shooting first. So the Soviet doctrine was the same as it had been in the Cuban Missile Crisis. You don't get to decide. There's no decision to be made here. Stanislav, Colonel Petrov, Comrade Petrov, no decision. You don't have any fluidity. If you get a warning, incoming American warheads, you will launch your missiles. That's your duty, and if you don't fulfill your duty, you'll be killed, your family will be killed, everybody else will be killed, plus the motherland will be nuked, and the Americans will get to sit there and, kind of wash their hands over the wreckage. So somewhere in the middle of the night in 1986 or 87, Petrov is sitting there at his station. He's drinking coffee, and all of a sudden the screen lights up, the big board lights up, and he's got two flashing red lights that are right beside the big screen, the repeater screen where the radar is, and these flashing red lights are saying in Cyrillic, launch. That's what they're saying, launch. They're not saying, think about launching, they're saying launch, and they're not yellow lights, they're red, launch. He looks at his radar screen and he can see incoming 7 or 8 American warheads coming exactly where you'd expect them, coming from right over the poles, on their way in. Here they come. Every time the radar scans are getting closer and closer and closer. He's got probably 3 or 4 minutes before these things income and hit his base, take out his missiles, and that means no retaliatory strike from his command. That's why he's got if A, then B orders. So he's waiting for this thing, and he looks at it, and he talks to all of his guys, and they say, it's confirmed, it's on the radar, there it is. All these other radars are seeing it, yep, okay. And it's like, comrade, we have to launch these missiles. That's our duty. He says, I'm not doing it. It's got to be a mistake. He has no reason to believe it's a mistake. He's had everybody check the computers. He knows it's not a drill. He just sees these missiles coming in, and he says, I'm not doing it. I'm not going to do it. If it turns out that we get confirmation that these things have landed, I'll launch them then, but not until then. I'm not going to launch until I'm talking to somebody who sees a mushroom cloud. Okay. So he's watching these targets get closer and closer and closer, and then one by one they just disappear off the radar as these incoming American thermonuclear warheads hit his territory. He's got his phone line out to a bunch of his guys out there, and after these things have disappeared off the radar, he says, what do you see? And his guys said, we don't see anything. Everything is fine. You don't see any mushroom? No, sir. Everything is absolutely fine. Turns out that it was a computer bug predicated on a training drill being activated without the activation going out. In other words, somewhere there was a bug in the software that made the radar perform as if it was a drill, because it was a drill. It just didn't announce that it was a drill. It treated it like it was real. And the guys in the complex had no way of knowing that it was not a drill. They just didn't know. It just appeared, and he didn't do it. And and Steve Whip says, want to play a game? That's where the inspiration for war games came from, I have no doubt. So, what I'm trying to say is this, to answer your question, GK. If in the middle of that conflict, where the pressures were so high, and you have dealt with this your entire life, you got to understand, guys like come on, Bill, how can I remember their names? This is so embarrassing. Petrov and Arkhipov. These guys have not just entered the military; their entire lives have been spent preparing to defend their country from an American attack, and it's happening in front of their eyes. This is why they joined the military, was to protect their motherland from this. And they saw it, and they didn't do it. They didn't do it. And my feeling is that when the stakes were that high, the pressures were that high, the unknowns were that high, and there were 25,000 nuclear weapons on each side, it was the end of the world. My opinion now, as I get older, is that they did not do it because it is not possible to do. There's not a person in the world that can pull that trigger, despite the thing that happened on the thing with the subs. I have heard that Reagan was asked this after he left office, and rather quietly, and I guess somewhat like he was revealing like a state secret or something along. I have heard this. I haven't read first person account of it, but I've heard it from several people, that Reagan, after he left office, was asked if there had been an incoming full-scale Soviet nuclear attack, would you have launched the retaliation strike? And Reagan said, no, I wouldn't do it. And if Reagan wouldn't do it, then nobody would have done it. What that's saying to me is that the idea of taking responsibility for the destruction of hundreds of millions of lives and two entire civilizations, I have come to believe, and I may be wrong about this, but I don't think I am, I have come to believe that decision is so overwhelmingly horrific that it is not an option for human beings. It just can't be done. And you can't have one insane person launch nuclear weapons. That's the first thing they did on both sides, was build in fail-safe mechanisms so that no one lunatic could just push a button and off it goes. That's why when Trump was president, he's going to start a nuclear war. It's like he doesn't just get to walk down to the basement, flip open the bust of Julius Caesar and have a big glowing red button there, pushes the button and everything goes. It doesn't work that way. If Donald Trump were to go in there and call his Joint Chiefs of Staff and say, I've decided to launch a full-scale nuclear attack against Russia, Trump would be put in a mental hospital. That simply would not have obeyed that order, and neither would the Soviets. So, I don't think what that opinion that I has as a result of the research I've done gives me that sense that no one will make that decision, which brings up an even more interesting point. And I think I'm going to have to wait for history to decide on this one. But if I had to bet, I would say 200-300 years from now or something like that, people will look back on the events of August 6th and August 9th of 1945, and they will say that was the end of full-scale war on planet Earth. That was the last time that there was a full-scale civilizational existential war on planet Earth. It was ended by those two bombs, because everything after that made war full-scale war, made it inconceivable. Not the least of which is the realization that the people who have always declared war have been people who could stay in the Kremlin or the White House while other guys go out there and fight those wars. But for the first time, nuclear weapons have made it crystal clear that if you decide you're going to declare war and order the use of nuclear weapons, you're the first person to go. You're not the last person to go. It's not like you're going to lose 7 million or 8 million or 20 million Soviet soldiers defending your position in the Kremlin or the bunker in Berlin. You're going out first. That tends to focus the mind. So in answer to your question, I don't believe that a nuclear war is possible. I genuinely don't believe it. I don't want to be wrong about this, and I wouldn't bet the farm on it, but that's my honest opinion, and I get more convinced of it every day. I listen to these liberals and look back on the history, and look, I believed it too. When Reagan walked out of Reykjavik, I thought we were all going to die. I didn't think I'd live to be 30. I never thought I'd live to be 30, ever, ever. I was utterly convinced I was going to be radioactive ash before I had a chance to grow up. So did everybody else who lived under those shadows. But now looking back on it, I realize that fear is so overwhelming and so motivational that it makes war suicide. And you can't, it's made full-scale war inconceivable. There was no way that there was ever going to be a conventional war in Europe that didn't go nuclear, because nobody's going to be fighting a full-scale world war and surrender when they still have a weapon that they could use to win the war, or at least call it a tie. It just wasn't going to happen. If the Soviets invaded through the Fulda Gap, they would have had a conventional invasion. We would have responded with our conventional forces. The only possible outcome of that, conceivably, would have been if our conventional forces had defeated their conventional forces so decisively that they decided to, we're just going to call that one a do-over, and we're just going to withdraw behind the line. But if it turned out that they pushed through and it was 20-1, it was just overwhelming odds in their favor, Germany's not going to surrender, and America's not going to surrender, and Europe's not going to surrender, NATO's not going to surrender while they still have nuclear weapons and just say, well, I guess all the money we spent on these things. No. If the Soviet conventional attack had succeeded to the point where they were overrunning the entire continent, then we would have used the little nukes. We would use tactical nuclear weapons on all of their troop concentrations. We would have said it's a legitimate military target, because it is. And then the Soviets would have used their tactical nuclear weapons against NATO concentrations, and that would have gone that way. And one side or another is now looking at losing this thing that have killed millions of people. And then they're going to say, well, we could surrender, or we've got behind us here 25,000 hydrogen bombs, and I just don't think I feel like much kissing Ronald Reagan's butt or Yuri Andropov's butt, or whatever the case may be. So, inconceivable. That's what I've come to believe. I genuinely believe I'm right. I would not make the assumption that I'm right. I'd be prepared for everything. But I think, rather than ending the world, I think nuclear weapons. And we will look at history, deep history, and say that nuclear weapons are what saved civilization, not what doomed it. I've come to believe that. So I'd be an excellent defense secretary. Okay. Ian Noland, Road Rider, Ray Juarez, Steve Young, and Eric Blake again. Ian Noland, hey Bill, in 2020, the 2020 court cases all got shot down. The 2022 court cases did slightly better, but still mostly got shot down, although they're not completely settled yet. Is there anything you can see or think of for 2024 to deal with the upcoming vote fraud other than just try harder? We talked about this a little bit tonight, and I'll just recap my thoughts. We've talked about this quite a bit. We look at well, first of all, let's just state the obvious. The people don't elect the president, states elect the president. That's how it works. I don't believe I've ever heard that said anywhere other than civics class, which I took back when America was still, America. I've never once heard that during any of the election coverage during the time I've been politically active. I've never heard a single person on ABC, CNN, Fox for that matter, come out and say, the people do not elect the president, states elect the presidents. They assume that that's the case, but they've never actually come out and said it. But that's how it works. Now, since the states elect the president, we know that some states, like California and New York, are going to go blue. Other states like Florida and Texas are going to go red. The corruption largely is in states that are already blue, so it doesn't matter. If just follow the argument here. For 2024, I'm not concerned about cheating in a state that we could not possibly have won anyway. am very concerned about getting rid of cheating, but for the sake of restoring integrity of the election, Republicans have to win in 2024. And so I'm just looking at the board. And what I'm saying is, I don't care how corrupt New York is, or I don't care how corrupt California is. We weren't going to win them anyway, so they can cheat all they want to in those states, and it doesn't affect the outcome. Likewise, we're going to win states that have high level of integrity, and even if they didn't, we're going to win them anyway. But the Republican states have a high level of integrity because they're run by Republicans. So now we're looking at this. Now we're looking at what we always look at with a national election. This is not new. We always know going into any election, with the exception of somebody like Ronald Reagan, who came 5,000 votes of running the table. But generally speaking, in any presidential election, we know that it's going to come down to 5 or 6 states that have to break one way or another, and that there's always a pathway to this 270. But generally speaking, it's going to come down to 5 or 6 states. And this is where Eric Blake just put in that Tim Pool pointed out that the key states Trump lost were determined by incredibly close votes, 20,000, if I recall correctly. The problem with that is that I don't think that Biden won those states by 20,000 votes. Looking at what I saw in real time and in the days after, I think 20,000 votes was considered the smallest number that would be an indisputable win. That this, I'm utterly convinced. I believe I've seen it. I've seen statistical analyses of it, and I saw the raw data. The software was designed to move votes in proportion to how far ahead Trump was. The more Trump was ahead, the more it started biasing votes towards Biden. So you can say he only won by 20,000, but if he needed to win by more than that, he would have. With that said, however, there's a couple things that are different this time. First of all, despite what happened in 2022, they're not going to have the sneak attack anymore. And furthermore, as the election progresses on election night, Donald Trump and the rest of the Republicans will be armed, will be ready for this. So the question is, how do you get enough election integrity in the 5 or 6 states that are going to send a message? And what I think the answer to this is, and you have to get really deep into the numbers for this, and I'm not terribly good at this. Steve Green's much better than I am. But just think of it this way, okay? I'm just gaming this out in my mind. Let's say, for the sake of the argument, that Georgia is solidly red. It's going to go solidly Republican, with the exception of Atlanta, which is going to go solidly blue. And let's say that we know that the Georgia electoral system is compromised. So basically, what's going to happen is, if the software does what it did in 2020, then as the results come in across Georgia and Trump's lead increases, it's going to increase the lead in Atlanta, basically, and going to increase it to the point where it's a win across the state. One thing that nobody can argue with, and we saw this in 2020, we just never saw it presented intelligently. And again, you got to understand that this whole thing was a blindside kind of thing. We didn't expect Twitter and the media, all that. But basically what I'm saying is, if you take that general scenario where all of Georgia goes red except for Atlanta, and that the Georgia electoral system is so corrupt that they'll keep increasing the vote count in Atlanta until they get 20,000 more across the entire state, Georgia goes to the Democrats. The one thing that is inarguable, and we saw it in 2020, and this, I don't know why this wasn't the centerpiece of everything. You cannot have more votes than the total number of voters in that district. And they did do that, and they got away with it in 2020. Some of these precincts had 120% turnout. If you can prove that a precinct had 120% turnout, that's guaranteed. Now look, I run into the same wall as you do. So many of these ballots came in. Well, just look at Dinesh D'Souza's. Was it 2,000 mules, 7,000? I don't know how many. 2,000 mules, a lot of mules. Here's videotape of these people stacking these boxes. Here's a videotape of all of it. And you start getting these votes like Biden, 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 Biden. What about down ticket? Nope, I'm not. These votes are coming in from God knows where. They're showing up late, and they just have Biden. They don't have any of the other candidates. Nobody votes that way. Nobody. That's prima facie evidence, is indisputable evidence that this is fraudulent. So the problem is not the electoral system. The problem is you can count on the press not only not rooting this out, but you can count on the press covering it. You can count on the press saying, no, everything's fine. So the question is, what we did not see in 2020, and what I kept expecting to see up until the Supreme Court punted. But at no point in 2020 did I ever see anybody present a cogent argument that didn't sound like it was a bit nuts. You know, I didn't see anybody go in there dispassionately, calmly say, these are the voting results that have come out of the machine. In this district, there's 122% votes cast. Of all the available voters in the district, it's 122%. Now, certainly you and everybody else is smart enough to know that if the maximum number of anything is 100%, 122% means there's funny business going on. Right? And then list it. I think the best argument, and I've never heard anybody refute this either. I've said it many times. I'm not trying to bash Ben. I was there on Daily Wire. I was the late guest, you know. They brought me in, you know. I'm like the filling guy after all the interesting guys are gone, and it was late at night, and so I was there after they suspended the voting in the 5 states. I was there when Trump came out and made his announcement. I was on camera with Ben and Jeremy and Andrew Clavin and whoever else it was, I think. And Trump said something's going on. And Ben said, that is the most irresponsible thing I've ever heard. He has no evidence to prove this whatsoever. And it's true that he could not have had any evidence in terms of here's my hand at that time. But I turned to Ben and I'll say to him what I'm saying to you now. Ben, the fact that they stopped counting is the evidence. They've never stopped counting ever before in the history of this country. Now 5 states or 6 states have stopped counting, all of them at the same time. That's the evidence. That's the evidence. I don't need to come to you with rows of documentation if the process is simply stopping for no reason. That's the evidence that something is going on. It's never happened before, ever, ever, ever. Now it's happening in 6 states, and not just any 6 states. It's not happening in any of the states where Biden was expected to win big, and it's not happening in any of the states where Trump was expected to win big. It's happening in 6 states, and it's happening in the states that are close enough to be called. And they call Arizona for Biden with 4% of the vote in, while they couldn't call Pennsylvania for Trump or whatever it was for 5 hours. No. Now, I don't know what's going to happen if we see that again, because I do know that the media will go through the same thing they do, you know, and guys like Bill Maher will say, oh, you Republicans always waving the flag and think you're so patriotic. Well, if you're so patriotic, you don't get to challenge the result of elections. I'd love to talk to Bill Maher about this. I'd love to talk with him. I really would. Bill, let me just take one example, Bill. Just one. Because you said it's unreasonable, and you got to be a little nuts to say that there was no evidence whatsoever of tampering in the 2020 elections. That's right. Okay, so during the course of the election, we were both watching it that night. You may remember that the results from Georgia were late coming in, and the reason that the Georgia results were late coming in was because there was a burst water main at the Allstate Center, the State Farm Center. That a water main had burst. This was announced on all the network TVs. Said that a water main had burst in this counting area, which turned out to be the single largest precinct in the state. But the votes were delayed because of a burst water main, right? And I'm a reasonable person, so are you. Water mains occasionally burst. It's kind of convenient that they burst during election night, but a water main could burst, right? Right. Okay, but after this was over, there was no burst water main, Bill. There was none. There wasn't anything. There might have been an overflowing toilet, but there was no burst water main. There was no water damage. If they stopped counting in Georgia because one of these key precincts, the strongly Democratic precinct, the one strongest Democratic precinct, stopped counting because of a burst water main, and then subsequent to the election, we find out that there was no burst water main, you don't find that a little bit interesting or odd? Do you actually believe that Jeffrey Epstein Hung himself? Let me rephrase that. Forget that. Do you believe that Jeffrey Epstein killed himself during the 13-minute window when the video camera stopped working and before they started working again? Do you believe that? Do you believe that? Because if you do, then you're not as smart as I thought you were. You're just an ideologue. The thing I've always admired about you, Bill, is you seem to have a mind, and able to make your own decisions, and you're not afraid to swim upstream when you feel that something's obvious. So if it seems obvious to you that Jeffrey Epstein hung himself while the video cameras burned out, and then miraculously, because a video camera can burn out, it's unlikely, Bill, extremely unlikely that a video camera is going to burn out just before this guy hangs himself, but it's at least theoretically possible. What's not theoretically possible is that same camera will then repair itself 13 minutes later and be back on again. That's not possible. It's impossible, Bill. So something fishy's going on. And when they say it's a burst water main, and there is no burst water main, and that's one case among many, then this should cause you some concern. Here's another example for you. The next day we wake up and we look at all of these curves, and we're looking at these states that shut down, and we see here's Trump above, it's a red line above and a blue line below it, and red line, and then right around 2 o'clock in the morning, there's this blue line, jumps the red line as new votes come in, and then it's blue line like that, instantly, like that. And when the people behind one of these states, one of the election officials, Democratic election officials, were asked about this, they said, well, that's a little statistically unbelievable, don't you think? Well, the response was, yes, that's right. It was unbelievable. It was an input error. So what? It was an input error. We made a mistake. We input the wrong data, and that's what caused the bump. So we corrected it, and now it's fixed. So Biden won that state. My response to this would be twofold. First of all, that kind of bump means if you're expecting that district to get 900,000 votes and it gets 5 million votes, that's not an input error. If I'm expecting to input the total for my precinct and I've got a 900,000 person precinct and I send in a total of 500.5 million votes, that's not an input error. It's not an error. That's just plain ridiculous. It's not interposing two of those digits. That's number one. And much more importantly, if Biden's down here and Trump's up here, and then all of a sudden, whoop, like that, because of an error, and we've been assured that error was an input error and it's been corrected, then we should see that number to go back down again, shouldn't we? Error corrected. Yes, that's how it should work, right? It didn't. It didn't work that way. Now, maybe none of this means anything, but to say that there's no reason to say that this whole thing is completely irrational is just plain nuts. You're either lying. No, you're lying. You're lying to yourself. You're not that stupid. You know you're not that stupid. I am willing to concede, in good faith, I'm willing to concede that it is possible that none of these things would have affected the election, but you have to be willing to concede that there is enough smoke here to say that we at very, very least are not being lunatics for saying that it's like something looks like it's on fire, right? Right? That doesn't seem too tough to me. And if you are lying and you don't care and you're okay with cheating and you think that voting month is okay, then why are you sitting here defending a position that can't win fairly? Because I would never. If I thought I had to cheat to win, I would say I'm on the wrong side. I got super chats I have to catch up. All right, whatever. Thank you, Cody. All right, here we go. Road Rider, Ray Suarez, Steve Young, and then there's a small novel from Eric M. Blake here. All right. Roadrunner. Meep, meep. No crap intro. Here's the question. All right, well, I like that. That's straight to the point. Manly kind of an introduction. Keep that in mind, Darth Chuck. Who's running this thing? Anita Dunn, Susan Rice, Susan Power, Chief of Staff Ron Klain, Mariana Yovanovitch, Valerie Jarrett, Barack himself, or is it an organized cabal of them all? I'm going to say Yes. You don't have to go deep, just a hot mic on who you'd put your money on. My answer is yes. My answer is you give me a list of names and you've said who's responsible for it, and I say yes. Breitbart had it right when he said at CPAC, it's Dadaism, and he wasn't even talking about this crew. The first thing so this is an interesting argument coming off of the election integrity argument, because I value intellectual honesty only because I don't want to get as mentally effed up as these people are. And if you're not honest with yourself and not constantly challenging yourself, then it is inevitable that you'll get as effed up as these people are. So I constantly challenge my own propositions up with which I will not put. And so I have to ask myself, what constitutes actual evidence versus what sounds good? So, as Sherlock Holmes famously said, once you eliminate all of the possibilities, then the only answer left is Sherlock Holmes said something at one point about something. I just don't remember what it was. So let's look at this. Is Joe Biden running the country? He's clearly not. And if you look at the pattern of the election, the 2020 election, Joe Biden was not even running until suddenly he was. And then he was not even on the radar till suddenly he got this endorsement from this guy in Georgia. Now he's actually leading, and the next thing you know, he's won the nomination. Okay, I believe that's ever happened before in American history. Somebody tapped Joe Biden. Somebody thought that Biden was the guy they were going to use to put in place to defeat Donald Trump. And Donald Trump bent the course of history. Whether or not he permanently changed it, the vote is still out on that yet. But Trump was the wild card. If you're a fan of the Foundation trilogy, Trump was the mule. He's the black swan. He was the thing that they had not expected. They knew how to deal with a Romney, and they probably wouldn't have had much problem with a Romney presidency, because Romney, like the rest of them, is just, well, we just want to get there a little bit slower than you do. But Trump mystified them. Trump, they had no contingency for Trump in 2016. And the American people got up on their hind legs, and they shocked the hell out of these people. I love to think of, when I think about justice in the world, metaphysical justice, I despise Hillary Clinton so much. I'm rapidly reaching the point where I'm beginning to despise Joe Biden more than Hillary Clinton, rapidly. And that's quite a comeback, honestly, considering how far ahead of the field she was. But when I think about Hillary Clinton and how awful she is, and how I really genuinely believe she has actually called for the murder of a significant number of people. I have come to believe this. I didn't believe it before. I believe it now, because Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself. And Jeffrey Epstein had one thing on the Clintons that they could not wiggle out of, and that is underage teenage sex. That's not something that they can get away from, not even the Clintons. So when I think about Hillary Clinton walking free, the only thing that allows me to sleep at night is the thought of her on election day, when early results are coming in and she's convinced that she's got it won. She's got the balloon drop already. She's got everything set. And over the course of a couple of hours, it starts going south. Reports are she was screaming and yelling and throwing things and throwing things at Panetta and throwing things at, was it Panetta? I forget. No, not Panetta. Whoever. Her campaign manager. And then over the course of several hours, it became clear that she had lost the slam dunk of the century, and that everything that she had, I believe, killed people for, slipped through her fingers. I find it particularly delightful. Podesta, thank you. I find it particularly delightful that the very nearly first woman president was the only president that I'm aware of in American history who did not give a concession speech because she was too emotionally upset and smashed off her ass drunk. I find that to be hilarious. Hilarious. Time for women to take over. Okay, well, you lost this one. What? When I say she left her supporters out in the cold, it's a very convenient expression. But in this case, it's literally true. She had large numbers of volunteers who were standing outside in New York. It was raining and it was freezing cold, and they were waiting for her to come out and to administer not the coup de grace to them, but to administer a grace, a moment of grace, to come out and say we fought our best fight, and all of us gave everything we had, and it just wasn't enough. And while I'm bitterly upset about this, and I know you are too, this is the country we live in. This is the system that we believe in, and this system does not provide any guarantees. Sometimes you get the bear, and sometimes the bear gets you, and that's what happened tonight. But I'm just so proud of all of you, and I'm so grateful for all of you and all of your support, and we'll get him next time. But she didn't do that. She, by this point, was so drunk that even if she'd wanted to go out, she was just, liquid on the walls. So they sent out what's-his-name, who said, "This ain't over yet." Thank God that there are no election deniers on the side of the Democrats who really love our country and fight for our democracy all the time. This ain't over yet. We'll see what happens tomorrow. Okay? So they all went home, and so that's that. But the Clintons didn't go away, and the Obamas certainly didn't go away. And I don't think it's, people say Barack's calling the shots, but I don't really believe that, because I'm not saying he's not in the room. What I'm saying is Barack Obama's entire political career was so manufactured that if Barack Obama had spent 30, 40 years in politics, or even 20 years in politics, you could say that he is he's a mover. He's a what's the word I'm looking for? He has agency. He's making this push, in the way that Ronald Reagan did, but he didn't. He was selected. He came out of nowhere. And the next thing you know, he's the next big thing. And the next thing you know, he's president for 2 terms. And so I don't think that Barack Obama is either smart enough, industrious enough, ambitious enough, or anything else enough to be a motive, not a motive in the sense of like a criminal motive, a motive force in means of a propelling force. I don't think it's him. I think he's certainly involved with it. And I know his politics are aligned, and I know he thinks he was president of the United States. But I think there are larger forces at play here. And I don't know who those forces are. I clearly know that the government of China has had their fingers in this, and so has the government of Russia, which is so ironic. It's ironic. It's tragic, actually. The reason Hillary... See, these people are very good at what they do. There's really something to be said for people who are professional liars and criminals. And one of the things that they know to do is that if you're about to be accused of something, you must immediately accuse your accuser of that thing. Because that way, when the actual charges come out, it's just going to look like a tit for tat. It's a decapitation strike is what it is. So Hillary had all of these connections with Russia. We know that Bill went to speak for $100,000. Next thing you know, we give up 30% or whatever it was of our uranium supplies to Russia. All the rest of it, everybody knows about this stuff. So the first thing that this colluder with the Russians did was to accuse Trump of colluding with the Russians. And that's the first strike. And now it's like, okay. So now Trump's on the back foot for his entire presidency because of the media and all the rest of it. So the Clintons have a say. Obamas have a say. I suppose Jill has some kind of say. I don't think she's a criminal mastermind. I just think she's just an incredibly vain and not very bright person who I think she thinks she's fooling us. But there are serious players at work. For example, I saw somebody did an analysis and then backed it up with a computer analysis, so it came out of a computer. It's got to be true. That Dreams from My Father bore none of the writing style, and by writing style I mean source of stories, sentence structure, mannerisms, complexity, all of that, bore nothing with respect to anything Obama had written before, but that it was extraordinarily like stuff that Bill Ayers had written before. And Bill Ayers once said he wrote that book. Maybe he was just goofing, you know. Somebody said that we didn't go to the moon either. That's not proof. But the analysis of it was things like a lot of nautical terms, and Bill Ayers apparently been in the Merchant Marine, and Barack Obama had never been out at sea before, that kind of thing. So when you're talking about guys like Bill Ayers and George Soros, you're starting to get into this. Valerie Jarrett is an Iranian operative. I don't think there's any question about that. And I don't think she denies it. And then you further find out that all of these Democrats are married. If you're either in the media married to the politician, or the politician married to the media. There's no separation anymore. It's a family affair now. It's an inside and an outside thing. And I've sometimes thought, you know, I'm sure if I'd made an effort, I could have found myself on the inside of this, you know. Certainly could have gotten myself extremely famous and rich if I became the conservative who suddenly saw the progressive light and then went out and started shooting down all these ideas that I'd previously defended. That would have earned me some money. And I think that's the only reason people like this do it. They do it for money or power. There's something I still can't conceive of selling your country out for anything but money. And these are people who can make as much money as they want to, you know. I mean, it's not like Valerie Jarrett is got a starving family where, you know, there you can make a case for somebody doing something really, really awful, you know. But no, they when the Soviet Union collapsed, where did all the Marxists go? Well, they turned into watermelons, right? Red on the outside, red on the inside, green on the outside. They didn't just go away. They'd been fighting to undermine this country since Lenin took office, stole office. That's what empire terror is all about. And the evidence that Lenin took grain that was, he's got millions of people starving to death. He requisitions grains from the peasants, leaves them to starve to death, sends some of that to his workers in the cities, but takes other huge amounts of grain, sells it on the international market for hard currency so that he can afford his Comintern to foster rebellion and Marxist revolution in Germany and the United States. And the United States ended up sending a relief mission to feed starving Russians because Lenin was taking the grain that they should have been eating and selling it in order to undermine the American country that was bringing free food over to his people. Those are the kind of people you're talking about. Those are the kind of people you're talking about. Eric mentions that I've talked about okophobia before. Okophobia is the mirror image of xenophobia. Xenophobia is fear of the unknown. Okophobia is fear of the familiar. And many of these people are okophobes. All you have to do is just listen to them. If they came from America, they hate America. They hate everything that America stands for because it's so square. Because Dad was an American, and Mom was an American, and my first husband was an American, and I hate all of those things, and I hate the boring little town that I grew up in, and I really, really like hanging out with the beautiful, cool people in Beverly Hills, up in the hills, and swimming in the pool at night naked, and I like looking down on those people in the valley, because I've been in those houses, and that's what it is. It's a beautiful experience. I never felt like it was beautiful looking down on those people, but that's what they get out of it. I don't get that. I just see it's a nice view, but they really take it as what it is. They're down there, we're up here. They're down there in the coal mines, we're up here in our little cloud city. And it's very attractive. And when you start throwing in things like money and women, and by the way, this is why the Epstein thing is so powerful and so deadly to them, and that's why they had to murder a guy in broad daylight in front of everybody and take all of that heat. Because as Whittle's first law of politics says, when the optics of something is so bad that you can't believe it, the only explanation is that the other thing would have been worse. So, when you've got people who have no soul, they substitute their not only their self-respect, but their self-image, their entire identity consists of consuming medication for their psychopathy. And that medication consists of money, power, and sex, usually. Those are the big three. And when these people are confronted with people like George Soros and the rest, who can provide them with all three of these things, it's very difficult for them to say no. I'm sure it would be difficult for me to say no, but I've thought about this many times. Somebody could make me an offer for that and I'll say, we'll pay you $1 billion. I wouldn't take it. I know that sounds like, to other people, it sounds like me just, of course there's a price for you, but there isn't. And the reason I'm able to tell you that with confidence is because I know there's no price for you too. There is no amount of money. It doesn't matter. It's not a question of how much money you're going to give me to sell out my country. There is no amount of money. You can make it $1 million, you can make it $1 billion, you can make it $1 trillion. You could tell me of all the things I could do to make America a better place with $1 trillion. It doesn't matter. I'm not doing it. I'm not. And that attitude has created the giant financial empire you see before you today. But it also provides me with a sense of a clear conscience, and that's priceless, actually. So it's hard to realize that it's hard for people with a sense of conscience and honor and soul and things like that to even accept that there are people that don't have these things, let alone be able to think like them. It's just inconceivable. But they're real. And these forces are real. The forces behind COVID are real. The number of people that were murdered by this, people that died that didn't have to die, people that died as a result of COVID. I'm not saying that everybody who was listed a COVID death died of COVID. On the contrary, that was used to do collateral damage to society. But that virus came from the Wuhan virology lab. And that lab was doing gain-of-function research using money provided by a number of international corporations, including in large part a corporation that Fauci developed in order to take money from American sources and investors, I suppose, and do gain-of-function research in China because the law prevented him from doing it in the United States. And credit where credit is due. You know, if you're not willing to grant what is obviously true to win a point, then you're just as bad as being a liar. It was the Obama administration that said, we are cutting off this gain-of-function research. We think it's too dangerous. We're stopping it. That administration deserves credit for that. And I'm not saying that they did it out of the kindness of their heart, but the fact is they did it. They did it. They said no. And Fauci just said, okay, well, we'll find some other way. So we did. So that virus was was made in that lab. There's no question about that. We knew that 10 days into the lockdown. We were doing the Stratosphere Lounge for 30 days, exactly. From the beginning of when we got locked down on March 18th of 2020. I was doing a Stratosphere Lounge show, and I'm in the middle of it, and COVID was obviously on the news, and then somebody says, hey, they just locked down your state, and I'm looking at the thing, and it's like, I got to be home in 45 minutes, or else I'm going to be in violation of a curfew. Do you know when I knew that this whole thing was a joke, actually? Well, certainly one of the contributing factors up to it. I learned that COVID wasn't as serious as they said it was when I realized that I was a vital employee. That, in other words, when they locked down Los Angeles on that first night, I took a look at what they considered to be people who had exemptions. And when I realized that I was on the list of exemptions, that's when I knew there's something funny going on here. Essential personnel, I have a occasionally high opinion of myself, but I would not call myself essential personnel in terms of a worldwide biological hazard.
I have a funny story about that. So I was working at an avocado nursery at the time, and my job was not listed as essential work, even though keeping a nursery running is probably more essential than podcasting.
Careful now. Yeah, go ahead.
And because of that, I'm like, I'm not going to work tomorrow. This is nice. I get a call from my grandpa, who was my foreman, saying, where the heck are you? And I'm like, I'm at home, the state's locked down. He's like, get your butt over here. I'm like, okay. So I worked through all of COVID, even though I technically wasn't an essential worker. And I never had to wear a mask at work either. That was great.
Well, that's awesome. And so, yeah, so I don't know if I've ever told this before, but it was either that night or the night after. I've married a Russian woman, and when this thing started happening, I said, well, honey, this is America. We're not going to, we'll agree for 2 weeks to flatten the curve because that seems like a good idea. But if you think we're going to just keep wearing these masks forever, you've got another thing coming. Never going to happen here. Not going to happen. And I was wrong about that, and that was embarrassing for years. But I actually did cry during the first days of the COVID thing. And what actually got me to cry was when this lockdown was announced, Natasha, having much more common sense than I do and a much more realistic view of things, said, we need to go out and get some stuff. We went to a CVS store, and I went in the CVS store, and all the shelves had been emptied, especially all the toilet paper. And I was so embarrassed by that. I was ashamed of my country. I was ashamed of my countrymen that they would. Now, I live in Los Angeles, so when I say countrymen, we're got a little bit of gray area here. But when I came out of that CVS and I saw the panic and when I say greed, I mean there were people that were coming out of there with 9 giant, not 9 rolls of toilet paper, 9 units of 9 rolls of toilet paper. All there is in the store. And I was so appalled at this that I sat out in the parking lot and I actually started crying. I was just so unbelievably ashamed. I was never afraid of COVID. I really, truly wasn't. It wasn't that I didn't think it was deadly. It's just that I got to the point where I was like, okay, it's here. People are going to survive. People are not going to survive. I've thought about pandemics quite a bit over the years prior to COVID. Did a lot of research onto things like the plague and yellow fever before COVID showed up. And I remember thinking, these events are terrifying because everyone is trying to avoid something that is probably unavoidable. And so since this thing was airborne and highly contagious, once I heard it was an aerosol, I said, that's it. Everybody's going to be exposed to this, everybody. And once I realized that everybody was going to be exposed to it, this was year and a half before there was talk about a vaccine, and that was what we presume would be a vaccine, an actual vaccine, not a DNA reprogrammer that has your body using messenger RNA construct spike proteins and then provide an immune response against that. An actual vaccine where they take the COVID virus and kill it or weaken it and expose it to your body. Your immune system recognizes this particular virus, and then it sees it next time it gets exposed to it. It got exposed to a weakened or dead version of it. So it recognized the outside. It's hollow on the inside. We're ready to go. Next time we get exposed to COVID, our immune system's on it instantly, kills it before it can get it. That's how a vaccine works. That's how all vaccines work, except for this one. So, okay, great. But when that was still 18 months away, I genuinely said to my wife, I said, honey, honestly, my inclination is to go down to LAX and start licking doorknobs. Because I don't want to spend the next 2 years trying to avoid something that's going to be unavoidable. We're either going to survive it or we're not. I think our chances of surviving it are very good. I remember one of the things about COVID that made me feel good was when we've had our first COVID death in America. I remember that very, very clearly. First reported death in America. And I said, I want to know about this guy. And it turns out that I'm doing this from memory, but words to the effect of, it was a man who was in his mid to late 70s with emphysema, diabetes, and he was overweight or something. He was not a strapping young buck, cut down in his prime. And once the data started coming in, and immediately within the first couple days, we got that guy, that Jewish doctor in New York who was treating 35 or 40 people at the time, and none of them were sick. They all recovered. who's dead now, by the way. And all of this stuff just happening, and how, and you know, I remember it's like 2 weeks to flatten the curve. Yeah, okay, I'll do that. Since you're asking, that was my attitude. Since you're asking for the health of my fellow citizens, yes, I'll do that. Absolutely. 2 weeks. Yes, I don't want people dying of heart attacks because the hospitals are so clogged with COVID patients. Let's spread the COVID patients out so that there's still rooms for hospital to do non-COVID things. Make perfect sense to me. I was willing to do it since I was being asked. But once they started saying, no, this is what you will do, I just started saying, you know what, there's something going on here. And anyway, I still see people walking around, not with masks over their own faces, that's them, but with masks over their children's faces. Those kids are permanently damaged, and every single day Dr. Zelenko, every single day these neurotic parents put their kids through this. It not only deprives them of facial recognition and all of that communication, now it also makes them into freaks whose parents are convinced that they're right and that the world is a fatally dangerous place. And if you as a child were to wander out the door and not have a constant supply of hand sanitizer on a backpack, you know, that's just constantly bleeding, gel onto your hands, then it's just a matter of time, little Billy, before you die this horrible choking death dying in your own blood. That's what these kids have been told about this thing. The number of kids killed by COVID is zero. Zero. That's the nearest round number. That's the nearest round number to 3 digits, 3 significant figures. It's zero. And now these kids are terrified because their parents are terrified. Their parents are weak cowards and they're terrified, and their kids are screwed up for life. For life. And I see these people wearing these masks, and I just say to myself, Natasha's always talking me down from this ledge because I get so bloody angry about it. And I look at them and I say, you really loved it, didn't you? You just loved it. You loved it during that year or two when everybody was as scared as you were. Or at least they seemed like they were. You were washing your hands, and you were staying indoors, and you were wearing your mask, and you weren't talking to anybody, and nobody else was allowed to either. And you just loved that, didn't you? You're really heartbroken. I mean it. I'm serious. Heartbroken that this thing has gone away. They still refuse to believe it. No. People still dying of COVID. That's why we wear the masks. Okay. All right, you neurotic lunatics. What's the matter? You want to live forever, you bunch of progressive apes? Anyway, to answer your question there, Roadrunner, I don't know who's behind all this, but I do know that I'm not even saying Fauci is one of the major players. I am saying that Fauci is a perfect example of the kind of person that we're talking about. A guy who the first thing I noticed about Fauci was that Fauci had Judge Ito syndrome. And that's why O.J. Simpson was acquitted, was because Judge Ito and Marcia Clark and all the rest of them suddenly weren't judges or attorneys anymore. They were TV stars. And they really liked being TV stars. They've been anonymous their entire lives. Now everybody on the planet knows who they are. And Fauci, you could watch him just eat it up. I am science. People say that they go to university because they want to be more like me, like Dr. Fauci. When they hear the word Fauci, they know that means integrity and science. I represent science to the American people. You don't have the slightest idea of what science is, you mass murdering son of a bitch. And I really hope you live long enough for somebody to bring you to justice. I really, really, really do. Because there's no question that he knew. Look, again, sometimes I just have to stop the train so that I'm crystal clear about things. If Fauci had been honestly wrong about this, I would not be angry at Fauci. I would say he made a mistake. He was wrong. His decision caused a lot of damage, but he made the best decision given the information at the time, and people make mistakes. You don't know what you don't know until you don't know it. If that were the case, I'd have nothing against it. But it's not what he did. It's what he did knowing what he knew. What he knew. For Puck Fitzberger says, define Judge Ito syndrome. During the O.J. Simpson trial that was held in Los Angeles, O.J. Simpson was one of the most famous people in America. It was the most famous murder in America for 100 years. And not only was this famous guy, beloved guy, now being on trial for a horrific murder, it also became a black versus white thing where you've got a black defendant on trial for murder of a white woman, and all of that baggage came along. And so every single television camera on planet Earth was tuned into the O.J. Simpson trial, which was in the mid-'90s, I want to say around 95 or so, somewhere in there. And because the entire planet was a trial of the century, because the entire planet was watching it, the judge, the prosecuting attorney, her assistant, Darden, all of the defense attorneys. Now, the defense attorneys were kind of movie stars to begin with, guys like Bailey and Horowitz. These guys are, not Horowitz. Oh, come on. Dershowitz. Those guys were used to having a little publicity. But these completely unknown city attorneys now are the most famous people in the world. And Marcia Clark had this horrible, nasty, curly hairstyle, and all of a sudden she comes in, she's got this $900 hairstyle, and now she's dressing real this, and Ito is doing all these other things that are, soaking up a little bit of camera time, and they're not being judges anymore. Now they're being movie stars. And saw that in Fauci the second I saw his first thing. Excuse me one second. Call I have to take here. Hi, honey. Okay. No, I'm still doing the show. So say hi to everybody. Yeah, hurrah! She says hello, everybody. So you good to get back? Everything all right on the navigator and stuff? Am I really? Hang on a second. Somebody said I'm 3 hours and 40 minutes into this. It can't be. That's nuts. That's insanity. I am. I'm 3 hours and 15 minutes into this show. My God. No, it's a sickness, honey. It's a sickness and disease. Nah, I thought it was finished too. Everybody's saying hi, Natasha.
Hi,
So,
Natasha.
oh my God, and Clay's here, so it's like it's like living in the haunted mansion here. Okay, so you're able to get back, okay? Fantastic. My wife is driving around town in her fabulous Buick SUV, and she loves it, and we love it, and it's just great. So everybody's saying hi. I'm saying hi, and if you're good on the way back, then I will see you when we get home. All right, baby. Love you. See you soon. Okay. Bye bye. Yeah, Los Angeles is not an easy town to learn how to drive in, and she'd never driven before in her life, and first we started learning to drive in the little local neighborhood in my Camaro, which has visibilities about like that out of the side and back windows. It's wider than a semi, and I remember when she was really nervous about going out onto Fulton, which was a 4-lane highway. And next thing you know, she goes out and aces the written test, and then I said, "Honey, you can't start taking driving lessons until it's a written test." And for a while there, I think she thought, well, if she gets the written test, then she's going to be just dumped on the LA freeways. But she got a couple of driving instructors, found one she liked. All three of them were Russian-speaking, dual controls. And once they got her out on the road, she just started really loving it. Got her license, passed the driver's test, obviously got the license, drove around in my car for a while, and her photography business has not done anything like what it was doing back in Moscow, not even close. But she had no credit when she got here. She built up her credit and saved some money from some of her photography things. So she went out and bought this little 2019 Buick Encore, I think. And it was, I don't know, quarter mile from our house. And we went on the lot, and there it was, 2019. It was a 2019 car that had 7,000 miles on it. I opened the door to that car, and I thought, okay, 2019, this might be within our range, And I thought, it's going to be banged up. It's going to be a used car. It's going to be 3 or 4 years old, but nevertheless, it's a starter car. We found that little car, and it looked brand new. 8,000 miles on it, 7,000 miles on it. So she's been going further and further, and then for a while there, when she first had to go over the hill from the valley into the heart of Beverly Hills, it's a difficult drive, and there's a lot going on. So so she would have she has a Tuesday night group that she goes out with a bunch of other Russian friends, and they kind of do music and meditation, stuff like that. And so it was a tough drive. So the night before, we drove together, and I basically let her follow the navigator, and I was just there like, as a safety pilot. And then the next night, she calls and says, I'm here in Beverly Hills, and she's home. Next thing you know, she's in Encino, and she's home. And then she's out in Santa Monica, and she's home. We went out to Zuma Beach together a couple times, and now she's home. And I'm just so proud of her. I'm so proud of her. Every single time she goes someplace. This thing tonight is not an easy place to get to, especially the parking. And she just drove down there herself, and then she drove on back. So it's just wonderful. She says hi to all of you fine people.
If she can learn to drive in LA, she can drive anywhere. I hate coming up to LA.
Yes, it's if you can make it here, you'll make it anywhere. All right, so let's see. Yeah, GPS. Honestly, Steve Whoop says, "Yay, GPS." It would not be possible without these navigators. I've mentioned them, I think, just last show or show before. They not only show you where you're going, they tell you where you're going, and they're just. I mean, the Apple Maps thing. I've never used a navigator because I don't need to use a navigator. But I'm an instrument-rated pilot who spent 4 years as a professional driver in Los Angeles using the Thomas guide, so I don't even need these bloody GPS things. But my wife, on the other hand, she, when I'm really checking this thing out, it's like the thing is saying, go straight through this light, and at the next light, make a right. I thought, that's helpful. So there you go. All right, moving on. Ray Juarez. Hello, Bill. Hello, Ray Juarez. I remember you saying you were flabbergasted by California calling pumping water up and down a hill a generator. I found a video that explains it much better than what you likely heard, and here's a link to a video. Skip 20 minutes in to see the part I'm talking about. The rest is good, though. I think it's a conflict of terms like most things now. It's more of a battery generator hybrid than just a generator. I've heard electric cars called generators, but this is just false as well. Question, how much of the political discourse today is caused by people either not knowing the correct terms for things or people in power changing them? By the way, ain't nobody knows nothing in politics anymore. We used to have an educated political class because we had an educated electorate, but that's destroyed on purpose. And so the crisis is coming, and then after the crisis, we'll all be just fine, and we will be able to do another cycle, and we'll move further. We'll be back. I'll probably live to see the second. Yeah, I think I'll probably live to see the second. I don't want to say space age, but the second age of that kind of optimism. That I'll probably live to see 1966 again. When there's nothing we can't do, and we're just astonishing ourselves at how much faster, higher, and further we're going, and all of this nonsense just got burned away. So anyway, my understanding about the LA power plant was that. Now he says I apparently got this wrong, but my understanding was that the water comes down from the desert, which means it's going downhill, and what California is calling a power generator, my understanding is the water comes down in the daytime when the demand is high. Let's say, for the sake of it, this has no possible meaning to anything. I'm pulling a number out of the thin air that's orders of magnitude wrong, but it's coming down when it's 10 cents per kilowatt hour. And then at nighttime, we pump it up when it's 3 cents per kilowatt hour. And that's how we save money or something. We take water and then we pump it back uphill. We take water downhill when it's expensive, wait till it's not expensive, pump it back up, and let it come down again. Now, apparently I'm wrong about that. I'm curious to know what the actual situation is. But in any event, no matter how clever they are with what they're doing with the water, it's not a hydroelectric plant. And it's not a power generator in the way that we understand it. I don't think. And even if it is, I've seen that station. There's not enough water there to be ridiculous. If humans left tomorrow, the city that would last the longest would be Las Vegas. They'd say the lights would stay on in Vegas probably for a year. every other country, every other city in the world would be out within 48 hours. And then after 10 or 11 days, all the nuclear stations would explode. But Vegas would be lit for about an hour. They said that's how long they think it would take for the hydro generators to finally lock up or clog up or whatever the case may be. So, there you go. Steve Young. So I'll look at that, by the way, and there are some things I really like to be wrong about. Matter of fact, I'd like to be wrong about everything. This is the curse of my life, Ray. But I'll take a look at that link and see what I got wrong there. So Steve Young, Biden impeachment inquiry is now on the books. Will stuff be discovered, or will everything get stonewalled? Well, as we began the show, now powers are realigning themselves. Now it's in the Democrats' interest for Biden to be gone. They don't want him pulled out of office in disgrace, but they also know that he will not be able to campaign in 2024. So in a weird sort of way, the most likely pathway, or at least a possible pathway, for the Democrats out of their conundrum is for Biden to be, like I said, him actually being removed from office would be such a disgrace that I don't think they're willing to go that far. But what they are willing to do, I think, is in fact, I think this is their strategy. Their strategy is not to let him get to the point where he's actually impeached, because, again, that's just catastrophic. No one's been impeached except for, I don't even remember if Andrew Johnson. No, Andrew Johnson was not removed from office. I don't think it's ever happened. No, Nixon resigned, but we've never had a president removed from office. They're not going to go that far. However, I think what they're at now is that let enough mud accumulate on Biden so that when Biden is kind of shunted off to the side, the electorate will not feel too terribly badly about it. It's kind of like, yeah, we're going to let him get a little dirty, and then maybe we'll let him get real dirty. We're not going to let him, bring that kind of disgrace on our party. But it's probably in the Democrats' interest to take whatever bloom that might still be on that ancient, dusty, decaying dust. Like Biden he's like one of those vampires from like a 1960 movie when Christopher Lee gets turned to the sunlight and then he just turns to dust and you just push him and he disappears. So I suspect it won't be stonewalled. I think it'll be slowed down, Steve. I think there's more than enough evidence to indict him and convict him. More than enough evidence. And I think they're going to let it get just far enough so that when it comes time for next year, they're going to say, Joe, I think maybe it'd be best if we just didn't put the country through this. So that's what I reckon is going to happen. And batting cleanup for the evening, ladies and gentlemen. Number one with the bullet, Eric M. Blake, the man in the hat, who has a small paragraph ahead of us here, which I don't mind reading because I caught the line that says, "You put it brilliantly, Bill, so take as much time as you want, Eric." Hey, Bill, I've been thinking long and hard about the deep and abiding flaws on our side, and one I find most fascinating is so because, frankly, the issue's right in front of our eyes and ears, : how often do we acknowledge en masse that Ronald Reagan was the great communicator, and yet we don't seem to ever follow through on that acknowledgement? The great thinkers on our side constantly talk about policy, principles, but never how to sell them. You put it brilliantly, Bill. I'm sorry, I lost my place. You've put it brilliantly, Bill. What's a colon? You put it brilliantly, Bill. How the heck are they, the cool kids, and we're the dorks? We're the ones who believe in loud guns, fast cars, and hot women. They believe in living in thatched huts, eating renewable algae cakes, and driving dorky little Prius while raising money for the Guatemalan water snake. Our side should be the easiest thing in the world to sell, and yet we just don't. And amid all this constantly, what was that? No, I'm sorry, you put it brilliantly. That was the previous paragraph. And amid all this constantly identifying Reagan as the great communicator, so what's stopping us from learning from his example, Far too many of us are content to fight, bicker, instead of sell. And whenever a great salesman does show up, like Trump or Vivek, a lot of people just look at them with suspicion. What say you? Okay. Reagan won 49 states in 1984. And he won 49 states in 1984 because he gave conservatives conservatism. He gave pragmatic people hope. But this is the part that nobody really understands. And he did it without being indigestible to the people that hated him. In fact, I don't know if people really hated him. They certainly didn't hate Reagan to the degree that they hated Bush, and nothing comes close to the way they hate Trump. So Reagan's appeal, his 49 state appeal, was not just that he was a conservative and not just that he made the country a better place. He did it with such a sense of humor that it was impossible for you to really, really despise the man in his bones. I'm trying to think of a Democrat who had something like that quality. There was an aspect to FDR, his public persona. Not a fan of FDR, but FDR was, at least certainly in the early days of FDR before the war, he was jaunty. He had a cigarette holder, and a top hat. He looked like he was just finished from doing the casting session for the Monopoly guy. But he really he was optimistic. His fireside speeches and stuff. He had an optimism and a sort of easygoingness that somebody like Lyndon Johnson or Richard Nixon did not have. Kennedy had that same quality that Reagan had, where you could disagree with Kennedy, but and you know what it comes down to ultimately? I think in all those cases, it comes down to a sense of humor, especially a self-deprecating sense of humor. When you can laugh at yourself, you disarm hatred, because you're basically saying something about yourself that the people who hate you want to say, and then you say it, and then you realize, I can't be that bad a guy, because, So when Kennedy says, was accused, did you buy votes, in Chicago to win the election? Did you steal the election? And Kennedy says words to the effect of, I talked to my dad, and he says, I'll buy the election, but I'll be damned if I'm going to pay for a landslide. That kind of thing is disarming. When Reagan gave one of his State of the Union speeches, and he was talking about something that happened to, I think it was giving an example of George Washington or something, and he tells the story, and then he stops himself and says, because Reagan's thing was that he was old. And then he basically stops in the middle of the thing and he says, now, before I go on, in the interest of accuracy for our friends in the news media and the reporters present, I did not actually hear George Washington say that with my own ears. And people who hate him laugh. I have had this experience. I can only think of it once. I did a speaking event at a college. It was a real contentious event. And it was at a relatively, what should have been a conservative school, is Cal Poly, I think. I got into this real argument with this guy about something. We were just going back and forth about it, and we both had our claws out, and I was basically saying, I don't even remember what the hell it was about. I was saying it was harder to be the head of a department than be a professor, because the head of a department had to do everything that a professor could do plus other things. And this guy had a real problem with that for some reason. And I said, what's your major? And he says, engineering. And I said, you know what engineering professors use for birth control? And he said, no. I said, their personalities. And he started laughing. And because it's funny. And that disarms people. So that's basically it. And here it is. Dante 2K in YouTube says, this is when Reagan iced the election. He was going to win it anyway. But his age was a real concern in 1984. And Mondale was making hay out of it. He's too old for this. And Reagan did badly in his first debate in the 84 election, very badly. He seemed confused, and that issue had to be addressed because they were starting to get some traction on him. And Reagan comes out, and Dondo Kirk just gives me the quote here. He just comes out and says, before we begin, I will not, when the age issue came up, he said, I will not exploit the youth and inexperience of my opponent in order to gain, political points. So he took his biggest liability and joked about it. And that is the sign of somebody who is genuinely confident. And it's let me see how I can rephrase this. Genuinely arrogant people cannot laugh at themselves. They're not capable of it. They cannot do it. You've never heard Barack Obama laugh at himself, ever, ever. It's not possible for him. Again, to be fair, because fairness is important, I'm not sure that Donald Trump can laugh at himself in that way. I don't think I've ever heard Donald Trump laughing at himself. I've heard Donald Trump say things like, well, I have to leave the White House and get into my golden limousine and go to my, golden palaces and stuff, that kind of thing. But I've never heard him really, mock himself, because I frankly think he's kind of insecure about that aspect of it. And I don't care, because I heard him in South Dakota and I said, my God, once again, with Trump, this guy doesn't need it. He doesn't need the job. That's why I think they fear him so much. It's not like you can buy him off. He's a billionaire. He's got all the money he could ever need, ever. He's famous already, right? I mean, that's what we say earlier when we were talking about these soulless creatures and stuff and how you'd sell out their country for money, sex, and power. And he's got all three. He's got this gorgeous wife. He's got all the money he needs. He runs this empire. They don't own him because they've got nothing that he wants that he doesn't have already, or that he can't get someplace else. Donald Trump is a narcissist. There's no question he's a narcissist, but he's our narcissist. And that's why I back the guy, because they're all narcissists. And given that, I'll take the patriot narcissist. Would I prefer it if he wasn't? Yes, I would prefer it. I would prefer it because I don't think Reagan was a narcissist. In fact, I know Reagan was not a narcissist, specifically because Peggy Noonan said that when she was writing for Reagan, the idea that she would ever write anything that sounded like, this is what I want you to do to the American people, he said, it just never entered my head. It was anathema for Reagan to tell the American people what to do. Reagan thought his job was to listen to what the American people wanted and execute their wishes. And so that simple dynamic alone disqualifies him as a narcissist. The idea that he's not like there for the Reagan agenda, it's like the Reagan agenda is to return the country to the people. What do the people want? What's good for the country? Not what's good for me, not what's good for the party, what's good for the people. All right, that's what we'll do. That's kind of a freak, Eric. You don't see that every day. And it's rare. And I'm trying to think of where I might have seen it on our side. And I can't think of anybody. Nobody comes to mind. Guys I really admire, like Josh Hawley, who I think is so perfectly composed. He looks perfect. He speaks perfectly. He's extraordinarily articulate, and he's smart as a whip. But I don't get that great sense of humor from him. Louis Gohmert has that kind of sense of humor. He's a genuinely funny guy. Thad McConnell was a genuinely funny guy. But I don't see it anywhere out there.
Ted Cruz has kind of played into the memery about himself, but
Ted
is kind of an awkward guy to begin with.
I admire Ted Cruz enormously, and of all the people in politics, I think he's the only one I can say is at least something like a friend of mine. Ted Cruz came up to me in Fort Lauderdale Airport. I didn't see him. He walked up to me to say hi. So he's been exceedingly kind to me, and he gave me honorary Texas citizenship, which I'm undoubtedly going to have to cash in someday. So I admire Ted enormously. I've done I've helped work for his campaign. I just really, really like and admire him. Like him enormously and admire him. And when he was running in 2016, I was called in to meet with him in Los Angeles. It was very late. It was still a California primary, so it was pretty much over by that point. And somebody asked me to come down and talk to him because he was in LA. And I got a chance to talk to a couple of his aides, but I didn't get a chance to talk to him about it. But what I said to the aides was, I'm listening to what people have to say about Ted, and they say that he comes off as insincere, and they're right. I have spent enough time with Ted in person to know he's the most sincere guy there is. If you want my advice would not be to teach him how to act on camera. My advice would be to teach him how to not act on camera. That's what Ted's problem is. Ted needs somebody not to buff him up. He needs somebody to rough him up. He needs somebody to let him be him, because while I dearly like him and admire him very, very much, I've been at a number of events where Ted was speaking, and when Ted Cruz is about to deliver a joke, you can see that thing coming down the freeway. I mean, you can spot that joke coming from 4 or 5 miles away, and you can just kind of set your watch. And it's like, here it comes. And it's because it's a delivered joke. But when you talk to Ted in person, he's very funny. He's just not performing, and he needs to stop performing. I think, knowing his background, and I know this has been discussed, but I cannot imagine a better destiny for Ted or the country than for Ted Cruz to be appointed to the Supreme Court, ideally as Chief Justice. That would be unbelievable. If Ted Cruz were to be the Supreme Justice to be the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, that would be absolutely 100% where he needs to be. Because he understands this Constitution and understood it from the age of 13 or something. He was called the smartest, sharpest, best, a law intern or apprentice that the Supreme Court has ever seen. I don't remember if he was working for Scalia, but he was just a machine. And if you were to get Cruz on the Supreme Court, that would be a tremendous win for freedom. If you could get Ted Cruz to be Chief Justice when John Roberts goes to his well-deserved retirement, then I think that the country would be in solid hands for the next 30 years. I mean, really, really, really solid hands. That's when the left would decide that the Supreme Court has to be abolished, because the Supreme Court's gotten the left everything that it ever got in this country, was they won through convincing 5 people in robes to overrule 100 million people, in working clothes. But Ted would be, it's not only would he be a good conservative, he'd just be a good justice. I'm utterly convinced that Ted Cruz would rule constitutionally, even if it meant something that conservatives would consider a setback. He would. I cannot imagine him not ruling constitutionally. I think if Ted Cruz ever came down with a decision as a justice on the Supreme Court that I disagreed with, it would be because he understood something about the Constitution that I didn't understand, and it may be one of those cases where, yes, this is awful and unpleasant, but it's one of those cases where better to let 10 guilty men free than hang an innocent one, and this is the argument, so that's why we're going to do it. John Roberts is the biggest disappointment, and also suffers from Judge Itoism. When the 2 or 3 times during Obamacare and during the 2020 election, Roberts essentially said, "I have the reputation of the court to consider." Is that a fact, John? Really? You have the reputation of the court to consider? When you say that, do you mean the reputation of the Supreme Court or the reputation of the Roberts Court? Because I haven't seen you do anything that adds any credit to the Supreme Court whatsoever. when the Supreme Court punted in 2020, I genuinely spent a week saying, then what do we have a Supreme Court for? Well, we don't have standing or whatever. No. It's not that you didn't have standing. It's that you didn't want to be the people to make the decision. You didn't want the heat. You thought it might reflect badly on your reputation, John, but there's only one agency in the entire country, in the entire government, that could have not overturned the election, that could have put it away, could have put the issue away. And if it had gone to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court had taken a look at it and had ruled that that the election interference did not significantly change the outcome, then I would put it down. If they ruled that it had changed the outcome, yes, that'd be a big can of worms, but that's what they're there for. That's their job. Do your duty. It's not supposed to be fun all the time. Do your duty. And no, we don't think it has anything to do with us. Well, we've got the biggest argument in the history of the country where two political parties and their entire constituency are at war with each other because of these charges and countercharges. Somebody needs to adjudicate this issue, and I'm thinking that the best people to adjudicate an issue of this size would be the Supreme Court on account of that's why we have one. No, we don't want to get involved with this. Okay, cowards. Okay. And Trump's appointees all basically backed that decision, and I found that to be particularly reprehensible as well. Reprehensible. I understand the pressure on them. I understand that if they'd taken that case and had ruled that there had in fact been tampering, or even if they'd ruled that there hadn't been, there would have been monstrous consequences. But there were monstrous consequences anyway. Put the imprimatur of the government on and make a bloody decision. Make a ruling. That's your job. That's your job. No. We're going to punt. Look, I'm a football fan. There are times when it comes time to punt. There are definitely times to punt. But if you've ever been a fan of a football team that was coached where it's 4 downs, up the middle, punt. They score a touchdown, we get the ball, up the middle, punt. Up the middle, punt. Up the middle, punt. 2 yards, 1 yard, 3 yard punt. 1 yard, 2 yard, 2 yard punt. That's it. It's like, I've had enough. Nope. So that's that. Well, hey, what do you know? We got through all those questions, and it only took us 3 hours and 46 minutes. Now, that's not a record, I don't believe, although the Stratosphere Lounge scholars have yet to weigh in on the issue. The justices of the Stratosphere Lounge have not made an official ruling about whether this is the longest show ever. I kind of think we once went into 4 hours, but 346 is in the top 5% for sure. So, then by golly, by gosh, and begorra, there you go. That's that. That's the end of that. I'm done. Now I have to deal with frickin' Clay. Let's do another hour. I'd rather do another hour. I have to talk to this guy. For those of you who are wondering why Clay is up here, it's because he, as you may know, is heading into the Army, and he asked me to write a recommendation. And it never occurred to me until this very second, because I'm rather fond of the boy. I'm going to read you that letter now. He did not ask me to do so. This will probably cause him acute embarrassment, but I'm going to do it anyway because I feel like it. So Clay is joining the U.S. Army, and he asked me for a character reference. What a stupid move that was on his part. But since he did, I want to make sure I get the right one. Hang on a second. Because I went through like 35 drafts of the damn thing. I mean, there's only, you can't outright lie, you just got to shade the truth an awful lot. Hang on a second here. I know that I did 3 versions. I want to make sure I get the right one because it's actually important. So there, is it in documents? Stand by, because I'll say 1, 2, 3. It's on the desktop, I think. Everybody just be cool. It's worth it. It's a nice letter. Put a little thought into it. Come on, baby. Come on.
You think the people deserve to see my brilliant face on camera?
I think we could probably work that out. Let me get this done first. Hang on a second. All right. All right, Hal. I'll go in through the emergency exit. I'll check my emails, and I'll find out which one I attached last. That's what I'll do, Hal. I'll go in through the emergency exit. There it is, version 3. Mostly spelling errors and things. All right, so this is the giant load of manure that I managed to shovel for this poor decrepit kid over here. Here we go. This is the kind of thing that will get you appointed chairman of the Joint Chiefs, my boy. It begins as a traditional business letter should. Upper left-hand corner, my name, my address, town, state, and zip code, September 1st, 2023, to whom it may concern. It is my great pleasure and privilege to provide a character reference for candidate Edward C. Bradley, known to many as Clay, for a leadership position as an officer in the Army of the United States of America. I am a conservative political commentator with over 100 million views on YouTube and have also written and presented several multi-episode history series on topics such as the Apollo program, the Cold War, America's Forgotten Heroes, and I'm currently concluding an 8-episode series on the Soviet terror state. I feel well qualified to speak on matters concerning American history and the role of the United States military with regard to that history, as well as the essence of the American character. My father was an Army veteran who now, in the words of the chaplain conducting the ceremony, rests among heroes in Arlington National Cemetery. Clay Bradley is, without question, the finest young man I know. I don't get around much, but we'll leave that out. He is deeply patriotic in a time, not to mention a place, where such sentiments are openly discouraged and even scorned. When it comes to his love of country, Clay not only has the courage of his convictions, he also has the courage to defend those principles publicly, effectively, and proudly. Another of the outstanding qualities of this outstanding young man is his willingness to take the initiative. He has handled many of my social media duties with diligence, competence, and grace, and has never been content to simply wait for instructions, nor has he ever failed to respectfully offer insights and suggestions which have improved the operation of my business enormously. Clay Bradley is also not afraid of hard work, and what's even more remarkable, to me at least, is the enthusiasm he displays towards whatever task has been assigned to him. There have been many occasions where he has driven for 2 hours each way to come from his home in Temecula to my studio in Los Angeles out of sheer devotion and without any compensation of any kind, and there have been many, many more occasions where he has offered to do so, in which I had to decline for fear of taking too much advantage of his positive attitude. And as far as his intelligence is concerned, I have not the slightest doubt that this had been and will become immediately obvious to any representative of the United States Army that he has or will come in contact with. In conclusion, it has been the single honor of my life to have spoken on behalf of the men and women wearing the uniform of the United States of America, and to have had the chance to speak to and in front of so many of our veterans. It is with their kind words in mind that I can say to you with absolute certainty that you will not find a better candidate for commissioned rank in the United States Army, and it would be a great pleasure to speak to anyone to answer any additional questions you might have in this regard. Respectfully and sincerely, Bill Whittle. That's all you're getting for free. If you want it buffed up some more, you're going to have to pay some money. Come in here and say hi to the good folks here, Mr. Officer Candidate in the United States Army. I did say, I wrote in a separate memo, we're going to have to get this kid some exercise because he's thin as a beanpole. Say hi to the Stratosphere Lounge crew.
Hello. I did run 4 miles this morning, so.
Well, you presumably you were running after communists and not away from them.
I live in Temecula. We don't have communists there.
Yeah, that's right. So anyway, that's our boy who came up because he needed the letter signed. I said I can sign it up here because I wrote it out and emailed it to him because that's what he asked for. I can sign it here and I can have it down to you tomorrow. But he said no, I'll come up and get it. So here he is, and that's our boy. And I kid him about it, but I really mean it. He's a superb fellow and done an awful lot of me for. Lot for me behind the scenes, and everybody's saying, hey, Clay, and he's going to make a fine addition to the United States Army, even if we weren't as in desperate need of him as we are. So there he is. Anything else you want to say to the crowd while you're on camera instead of just booming out of the frickin' air conditioning like a bad fan dying on us or something?
Thank you, everybody. It's fun being a part of this community. Bill's great. Bill embarrassed me, so I'm going to embarrass him now. I found out about Bill when I was 18. I'm 26 now.
You're 26. I thought you're 16.
Yeah, I get that a lot. It was funny. Kyle Mann's mom thought the exact same way. Yeah, so I know a lot of people in this industry. I've been very blessed to get to know a lot of these people. But yeah, I found out about Bill when he was still at PJ Media, and basically because going through YouTube and scrolling, and I got a video for Zoe Rachel, and thought that was great. Clicked on PJ Media's account, found Bill, thought this guy was amazing, and then from Bill led to Shapiro while it was still Truth Revolt, and then Daily Wire.
I'm a gateway pundit. I lead people onto harder stuff.
Yeah, well, Bill's still one of the smartest people that I know, so still my favorite. And yeah, he's a great guy. He's one of the few people where you can actually meet your heroes and they live up to what you expect from them. You can't say that about everybody, but
live up to or exceed.
Very true. Very true. But yeah, Bill's one of the few guys who is able to live up to that. So thank him, and he's a great guy. So
thanks, man.
You're
Congratulations.
welcome. Thank you.
Our country could do no better, and I'm very proud of you. Now, don't get yourself shot out there, or else I'll feel bad. And if you do get yourself shot, be sure to take at least 100 of them with you. Now, Clay's going to be fine. He's a fine fellow, and it's my great pleasure to be able to do things like this. So every now and then being able to write comes in handy, and this is one of those times. All right, gang. Now, I'm sure when you see him next time, you'll be sure to give him the... Steve Whoop said, cut your hair. I told Clay to change his Gmail photograph, the little avatar that comes up, because he looks like frickin' Gollum in it. It looks like blown over in a stiff wind. I said, show me your war face, man, and use a long lens, so that we don't get this distortion. But in any event, that's our boy Clay, and we're very, very proud of him. And you're gonna be a fine officer, I have no doubt. Okay, so that's it. That'll do it. I think that's enough of this particular goat rodeo for one day. There's my buddy John Voight, and there's Goran, who's now very jealous that he's being pushed into the far background. And I still have an awful lot of stuff to do, so that'll do it. Now, I'm going to get him to move all of the stuff for me. I'm going to go out and get a margarita, hang out with my wife, and he's going to be rearranging the furniture here for the next 6 or 7 hours. I put a little muscle on him finally, drag some of these things around. But I think that'll do it for this edition of the 4-Hour Stratosphere Lounge, brought to you, as always, by the members at BillWhittle.com, who continue to keep the lights burning and keep the cutouts standing in the orange and blue paint from peeling and all the rest of these things that these fine people do. And to whom we are eternally grateful, and that means forever, and that's a really long time. I did not get to the super chats, and I said I would, but I just don't think that this is the time to do it, because I don't want to. I'd like to end on that. So if you did do a super chat tonight, thank you, and I'll tell you what. Next time, do a super chat for $1 or 50 cents or something. I'm serious as I can be about this, and anything that lights up as a super chat, I will be happy to take, and we'll just call it, just kind of a sort of an advance payment. All right, that'll do it again. Thanks everybody for joining us. Now we're going to go over to the YouTube stream, and we're going to say goodnight to those good people. So for you out there on YouTube, thanks very much for joining us. As always, thanks for your support, and we will see you next time right here on the Stratosphere Lounge. And now that those losers have left the building, I can finally unrack, just sort of relax a little bit and get those Karens and the rest of these losers off of my plate. It's good to see all of you, and looking forward to having a conversation with my buddy Johnny Voight in the near future. And again, thanks for everybody. So we'll see you probably Monday night for Stratosphere Studios. And until then, have a good evening and all the rest of that groovy jazz.